Hello, everyone, and after 28 days, we've returned with another episode 160, which is technically must be episode 161 because episode 160 was actually a new format of the podcast, which was called Kouryer Convo. We have introduced a new group discussion type of podcast. I recorded it with Amir Hamze and Zaid Aghakhani. You can check it out on the YouTube channel and the Spotify as well. And now we're back with individual podcasts with our guests today, which we have Miss Laura Gallagher. She's a character artist and also founder and educator at Outgang, which they have a YouTube channel and Facebook, links down below. And we're going to talk about the YouTube channel, by the way, specifically in the during the podcast as well. And we're having a contact from Montreal, Canada. Well, with that being said, how are we doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for the invite. It's super cool to be here, so I'm super glad. Yeah, it's great.
My pleasure.
Get a chance to finally meet you and get to speak with you.
All right, so now here's the thing. I recently came up with an idea for the format of the podcast from now on because in my head, I kind of decided from day one that I'm going to do this for decades, for a long time. So I decided it's a fun subject, for example, especially put it in the intro. For maybe in 10 years or a couple of years when I'm or not just me, anyone who might be listening to this episode, give some pop cultural references, 2-3 just keywords of what's happening during the time we're recording. Yeah. Well, there's the whole Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. There's a still war in the world. Yeah, I'm kind of sensing this shouldn't be, this kind of becoming problematic, but so yeah, these were the couple of references I wanted to drop. And yeah, as you can imagine, I'm a bit rusty with podcasting. I'm not myself. I need to warm up. And yeah, so here's the thing I want to ask. First of all, give us a little introduction on how we got into the world of visual arts and design in the first place. Everyone has their own stories. Since I was a child, I used to draw everywhere and all the time, and my parents saw it, then they sent me to art school and all that. There's this cliche and a stereotype of that, and there's another one where they I went to pursue engineering or become a lawyer, but then I realized, it's not my passion, then I switched. What was it for you? How was it for you?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so here's my potted bio when it comes to how I got into character art. By the way, I just want to say that I'm seeing you a little bit pixelated, so I don't know whether you're seeing me pixelated, and if that's the case,
no,
I
it's
can maybe
probably
look into fixing that.
No, I think my video is good. It's just I think because of the internet connection, there's a little bit of lag because it was for you earlier. Yeah, it happens, but
Okay, cool.
It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal.
Cool. Okay, so here's my potted bio then. Let me see. When I grew up, I did a lot of drawing when I was growing up. I was never really interested in trying to learn how to draw well, though. I was just interested in drawing. I'm I don't care whether I'm drawing well or not. Okay, I could take some courses in drawing, but that sounds boring. I just want to draw, So I had that kind of sort of impulsivity at doing that. So I was really, really into drawing just as a natural thing, And for some reason, I had in mind that when I was going to grow up, I wanted to become a doctor. I think there's probably some family influences there at play. And so I'm I'm going to go to medical school. I'm going to become a doctor. It's going to be great. And then I got to college, and then I was this really, really is really boring. It's I really love science. It's a great topic. I love everything about the human body, these sorts of things, but I cannot for the life of me sit through a science class and stay sort of focused on it. It was just so damn boring, So I was there back in the classes of when I was in college, and I was just drawing. I was still doing drawing back then, or writing stories and writing fictional stuff, so clearly my mind was into the creative arts, and so after having doubled a few years, because I was really just uninterested back then by science, or rather I was not interested in studying science, I sort of realized, actually, maybe this whole drawing thing, maybe it's something I should keep on doing, And at the same time, I kind of love to play video games. So it was just natural for me to be I want to do character art somehow, or I want to do 3D, So that's kind of like how I got into it. It was just the the natural answer to my love of creative things, my love of technology, my love of video games. At the beginning, I wasn't sure I didn't necessarily want to do character art per se. I was just like, I'm going to do 3D and I'll see where that leads me. I started to do a bit of environment, which I actually quite love to do as well. But I kind of realized at some point, like, I kind of want to do whatever's on the box art. It's like back in the time when box art was important. It's like now we just download all our games, so we don't really care about what's on the cover. But back then the whole thing was, obviously you go into a store, you buy the game, and I'm like, I want to be the one who does the character that's on the box. You know, so there's a bit of a egotistical side to it then, perhaps, to choosing character art. But at the same time, I kind of realized too that I love everything that has to do with biology, the human body, anatomy, which also kind of goes back to my interest in science to begin with and becoming a doctor in the beginning. So in a way, character art is just the perfect role for me. So I kind of realized that early on, and I haven't looked back since.
Interesting. And actually, you made a really interesting point about, like, the box covers of video games, because I think I saw a YouTube video from a podcast from like a famous musician. I kind of forgot. I think it was James Hetfield from Metallica on Joe Rogan podcast or something like that. Where basically, I think, yeah, that was it. I think we're talking about the fact that everything is now digital now, but there was a whole joy of like going to like a record store and just buying vinyl records which had the album covers and everything. It had its own world, honestly. And about the box cover art, that's actually such an interesting point. It's the same with games as well, I think, because I remember when I was a kid and I legit remember I would save up my allowance for a week and just run. I could buy 2 games in the video game store that I could buy. By the way, you might be wondering, wow, like games I know in Canada and US is like $60, I know, but in Iran, where I used to grow up, everything is pirated. So you could literally for 60 amount of like let me exchange like the currencies. Yeah, for example, if a game is $60 in Canada, in Iran it's about like half a dollar or a dollar. Yeah, at that time, like but now it's much more expensive. But still, it's still more cost efficient. And I remember Far Cry 3, Gears of War 2, of those games, like just the cover art, just looking at them, just touching the box, just all the details of it. Like I was a geek about that, honestly. And yeah, but here's a thing. I kind of have a theory that, believe it or not, right now there's vinyl records are still being sold like pretty well. Like there's collectors for music, but I'm not sure there will be collectors for video games in that case, because it's a bit different. Do you think it will be different? Because video games companies usually make like collector boxes with assets and everything for people who want to like buy some exclusive VT. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think so. I mean, there's quite a lot of used video game stores and collectors stores for like video games, right? Like there's already quite a lot of, there is a market for that already, I think.
Oh yeah,
like,
the boxes, yeah.
Yeah, the boxes, but like also the cartridges, like I'm kind of thinking of like cartridges, like if you're trying to buy, let's say, a cartridge of like Final Fantasy 3 or Final Fantasy 6, depending on if you're in North America or not there, which would be 3 and not 6. But like if like, I don't know if you've checked the price of that. Like there's like a website you can check the price of like used video games, and like that goes for like hundreds of like dollars or something.
Oh yeah. I remember some things, yeah.
There. So yeah, I mean, as long as there's things that I think are highly desirable or emotionally charged, as let's say video game cartridges are, perhaps even video game CDs, and that there is also a limited supply of that, then I think you'll see a market kind of form around that. So, but like you're sort of mentioning something interesting about vinyls, because it's not just about collectors, right? It's also about people also kind of feeling now that, vinyls have a better sound. Like there's people who aren't necessarily buying vinyls because they want to have that within their collection, but simply because they enjoy it more. Like if you kind of think of, and for me, there's something interesting there, because like my Steam shame, like pile of shame, is like hundreds of games long. Like, and every time there's a Steam sale, I just keep buying more stuff. And I find that I'm not enjoying games as much now, because I'm always kind of playing a game, and I'm kind of thinking like, okay, like maybe I should play this other game. Like games don't hold my attention now anymore the way that they used to, because there's just so much variety. There's so much out there that I could play. Like, and music is kind of the same thing. If something kind of bores me on Spotify, I'll just listen to something else. Whereas back when we were listening to music on CDs and cassettes and vinyls, I would actually find that I mean, I didn't listen to music on vinyls. I'm not from that time, but certainly CDs. I would definitely enjoy and appreciate more the albums I would listen to. I would listen to them more attentively. I would listen to them more times, because it's kind of complicated to, first of all, you don't have as many at your disposition, but also it's kind of complicated to like open the CD player, change like the CD, like, and it's not that complicated, but there's still a little bit of work that you need to do there, right? So I hear that too from some people now who choose to buy vinyls. Like somehow they like, I've heard that some of them appreciate more what they are listening to, because when you start a vinyl, you can't stop it. I mean, you can, but it's not just a button away, right? It's like you got to get up, you got to go to your vinyl player, you have to change it, So somehow, like you like that the fact that it's a little bit hard to kind of change the vinyl, and that it takes a little bit of effort to put one in, means that you're actually kind of appreciating more what you're listening to for some reason, which I find very interesting. Which I don't think we have that for video games now, but perhaps if you still buy games as a physical medium, perhaps you still have a little bit of that, where like I had Bloodborne in my PS4 for probably like 6 months, and I would just sit down and play that game, and then at some point I was like, I'm kind of tired of playing Bloodborne. Maybe I want to play Dark Souls 3, because Souls games seems to be all I play. And I'm like, yeah, but I got to get up and I got to take the CD out and I got to replace it. Screw it, I'll just play Bloodborne again. Anyway.
Yeah, and like I'm kind of worried about that, because like from even like 10 years ago, there were games that were on like DVD and cassettes and stuff like that, and probably like just like the boxes right now from like 90s, they will be like valued at some point because of the scarcity, the nostalgia, and all that. But imagine now, like the amount of physical copies of games are new games. They don't really make physical copies. What about like 40, 50 years later? Like, will there be the future generations? Honestly, if it goes like that, I mean, I'm not trying to sound like a boomer or a conspiracy theorist, but like just looking at it like objectively, like there won't be that kind of like that sort of love for actually physical products that we have nostalgia for. Everything will be digital. And oh my god, don't tell me the future will be all NFTs. No. I don't want to do that.
That would be today, yeah.
And yeah, especially with there was this streamer I used to watch a long time, like Miskiff. I don't know if you know. His whole shtick is about like boxes, Pokemon boxes, and he actually has a couple of expensive boxes. And he always showboats about it, and it's kind of fascinating. And all right, so that subject aside, let's move into another subject, right? Another question. And what is your main branch of design that right now you're focusing on? I know in the email you mentioned that right now you're mostly focusing on tutoring and mentoring other people. But in general, what is your main branch of design that you've been focusing on and specializing in? And tell us about your experience from the start of it until now.
Sure. Did you say branch of design, by the way?
Like, for example, like, are you like? Of course, it's character art and design. So that's what I meant by that. Like,
oh yeah. It's like I do character art. I don't do design. There's concept art.
Oh yeah, sorry, my bad.
It's like
yeah.
No, I'm just making jokes here. In fact, I actually think that more people who do character art should be interested by design. Like when I started doing character art, by the way, like I had this kind of mentality. Like it was a really, really bad one. Okay, and like, but somehow I kind of felt like that, because like when you do character art, you're often trained to be, I don't want to say that you're trying to be a robot, but you're trying to be like, okay, here's a concept, then let's do that concept in 3D exactly the way that the concept is. That's like traditional 3D art education, or character art one, although perhaps environment is a bit the same thing, but it's probably a little bit different. But anyway, so when I started doing 3D, or character art, I was really much in that mentality of like, I'm not going to do design, like, or rather, not that I was not interested by it, but it almost got beat out of me. It's like, no, like, here's a concept and you have to do it exactly like that. And often, if you would post things online that, you try to inject a little bit of your own creativity in there, people would be like, "Oh, that doesn't quite look like the concept." Like people would actually criticize you for not matching the concept exactly. So, yeah, like a few years within my career, I was like, give me a concept and I'll do it exactly. And if I don't have a concept, then I can't work, or my job is to go see the concept artist and say, "Hey, I need a concept for that." Um, and I don't think that's really a great mentality because I think on productions, it's great to have people who are creative, like people who do character art, 3D character art. You actually want those people to have some design sensibilities because the truth is that concepts don't always have all the answers that you need. Sometimes there's things about the concepts that are a little bit off. They don't quite work in 3D. The sense of perspective isn't quite right, left and right. There's details that aren't there, and you have to sort of patch in the information that isn't there. So I actually I'm more interested in design now. I kind of have discovered that through time, like actually being interested in design is a great way to really up our skills when it comes to character art. It's a great way to be a better team player as well, to be more valuable for our team. Um, and so, what do I do now? Well, that is one of the things that I do now. Like when I do coach people, when I do mentor people, even when I just record classes there, I try to inject a little bit of design here and there when it makes sense to do so, or to kind of sensitize people to the idea that um, developing and really nurturing that creative part of us is not only first very interesting for us, it's very gratifying to inject our own, like a little bit of our own design when we create something. Um, but also, it also makes us a better fit for working on a production. Um, and it allows us to simply create better characters in the end, which is what we all want. So, what kind of branch of design am I interested in? Well, I do a lot of if we're talking strictly about character art, these last few years, I think I've been very interested in fashion. And, like since I've discovered Marvelous Designer, I've been very interested by everything to do with cloth. Like a lot of people will touch Marvelous Designer and they'll be like, screw the software. Like, I hate this thing. It's like, I can't use it. This is so like not intuitive at all. This is so like not like ZBrush. And I heard someone also like say that Marvelous Designer was like shaping water. That's kind of how he saw it. So a lot of people are very uninterested by Marvelous Designer, but somehow I found that I kind of liked it. It kind of tickled that part of my brain who likes to solve hard problems. And so that kind of brought me to find a lot of pleasure in kind of discovering how clothes are made, finding out about high fashion too a little bit, um, and just there's a lot of creativity there. There's this kind of whole branch of design that a lot of us are not all that interested in, which is cloth design, fashion, and which kind of sucks because if we do characters, we're obviously dressing up all the characters that we do, right? So, um, and when you start looking at like really high level designers in terms of fashion, they create things that defy the laws of physics. Like things that even the best concept artist would have a hard time to come up with in terms of um, ideas. So there's a lot of creativity there. There's a lot of very interesting design happening on the fashion side of things, and I found that is very. It's not something that is that people have dug into as much. People who do 3D character art, they haven't dug into that as much as they have dug into things like hard surface design or things like creature design. Somehow the idea of designing clothes isn't as appealing for most people, but I think it's as important as those other branches of design.
Yeah, definitely when it comes to characters. But by the way, just for anyone who's listening, if you go to her art station, which the link is down below, there's also a really neat cheat sheet from like Marvelous Designer to ZBrush up for making like clothing assets and stuff like that. I think it would be super helpful for anyone who's looking to learn about that kind of workflow. And speaking of workflows, before I jump into the workflow subject, I also just want to ask something. I was wondering, of course, like with Marvelous Designer, you can make like super cool, detailed, like that a level of high fidelity with your like clothing models that you can't get, like for example, with ZBrush or 3D Max or Maya or other softwares. But I was wondering, for example, a video game company that is working on a new IP, would they, for example, I mean, it depends on the IP as well, but usually, like I'm talking about the general, like general, like most common, like IPs. Would they, for example, would industry evolve in a sense that they would start to specialize in everything? I mean, because of the budgets and times and all of that, they would just use the same things that they did before. Like, for example, look at Far Cry series, like right now. I mean, maybe I'm making a bad example because Ubisoft is, Ubisoft, but since Far Cry 3,
I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but cool.
they're not that. It has that own story, but basically, imagine like
I'm
this.
gonna get you into trouble. Yeah, yeah, sure.
No, you won't. But from Far Cry 3 to Far Cry 6, which has been like 9 years, like 2013 to 2000, yeah, 9 years, I think. Yes, the gameplay is the same. A lot of things are just retextured meshes, and with clothing, I don't think they really. For example, with cars, I knew one of the car artists of the Far Cry 6, and she was actually supposed to be on the podcast, but didn't happen because of the whole Ukraine situation. Kind of tragic. But the point is that, for example, as you said, with hard surface stuff and a lot of the other subjects, there's a lot of like people who want to delve into it, because I think personally hard surface encompasses a lot of things. But for example, with Marvelous Designer, it's a little bit more niche. I think that's kind of naturally what happens when it comes to like the integration of it into the workflow of like most industry studios. But I think maybe like here's the thing. VR is going to be a huge like player in the industry in the whole, I think, in the future. And I think things like Marvelous Designer and actually good clothing, like designs and models and all of that would come in much more handy in those areas. Or maybe animated, like future animated movies, uh yeah. So do you have any other thing you want to add into this subject?
Well, you've mentioned something about specialization and IPs, and I think through what you were saying that you're kind of asking a question like, are studios looking to specialize more, either when it comes to character art subtopics, or maybe even just as far as Marvelous Designer is concerned? What I can say as far as that's concerned, or just cloth creation, because it's not only Marvelous Designer. Um, so the last project I worked on was Horizon Forbidden West, back at Guerrilla Games. I left there in 2019. I was lead on that project for. I stayed there for 2 years at the studio, and one of the things that I have done for my time there. One of the things that I have also that because I was really into Mars Designer, into cloth, that was really something I was really really interested in. And what I have realized there is that not everyone is able to, and I don't mean the people within the studio here, because we did do a lot of work with external partners. So just in general here, like there's a lot of people who do character art who simply don't have knowledge about what makes good cloth, how to, what like whether folds on piece of fabric are proper either for that type of material, for the place over the body that you are. When we talk about zones of compression, zones of tension, the kind of folds that you get, like leather does not fold the same way that cloth does, that let's say natural textiles do. And then the natural textiles don't quite fold the same way that synthetic textiles do, And so there's a lot of people who don't necessarily know a lot about that, because that's not really taught in school, usually, like that particular topic there. And so it was a big challenge for me. It was a big challenge that I had given myself to really level up the cloth game within, or just really level up the cloth within the game. Perhaps I should say it that way. And I think it shows. When you play Horizon Forbidden West, like you can see a lot. Like the cloth is really really cool. Like a lot of the clothes, they just have these very intricate folds. So all the external partners we have worked with have done a really fantastic job. All the internal team has done a great job on that. And if you compare Horizon 1 with Horizon 2, there's a really big step up in terms of the quality of the expression of the cloth, of the folds, you know? Um, and so, yeah, one of the things I have done there was to really, really focus on training a lot of people to become better at that. And I think it shows, and I think that there's a lot more that the industry can still improve upon as far as that's concerned, because as I said, it's not something that we have focused on that much, I feel like. Collectively, cloth expression, like when I started, it was like, let's just sculpt folds, and you just take a standard brush and you make a few lines over a surface, and there you go, you got folds. It's like we weren't even thinking of like, okay, is this leather, is this cloth? That was not even something we would even ask. It was just, okay, just folds, and using the standard brush, I think that we have evolved as an industry since then, and I'm quite glad. But I think we are not at the end of the evolution. Like we are, I think, in the generation now. I think in the PS4 days we were as well, where we are really ramping up our cloth game, and so I'm super glad to see that. I've kind of lost track where I wanted to go with this, unfortunately. But you sort of asked me, I think, about IPs and specializations. Not everyone is interested by cloth. There's a lot of people who don't want to have anything to do with that and with Marvelous Designer, and so it makes a lot of sense to have people who are specialized more and more into cloth creation. Whether that's the case in video game studios now, it's hard to say. But I think that a lot of studios now are kind of realizing that, yeah, like, just like for hair creation, even for facial sculpting, it's really good to have someone who has really deep knowledge on the field of cloth creation, because those are usually the people who are able to create better cloth, or who are able to help teach other people on the team how to create better cloth, So it makes a lot of sense to me to have someone on a team who is hired specifically for their cloth creation skills, which doesn't mean that they have to only do that, of course, as a job. But I think studios can gain a lot by really giving soft roles to people. Like, okay, you're the master when it comes to cloth, or you're the expert when it comes to hair, or it makes a lot of sense to give people these kind of roles and to really empower people to be like, okay, so since you are that person who is now the expert in cloth, it is now your job, and we sort of count on you to do the research that you need to do to really see how we can level up the cloth within our game. And I think that that's true whether you're creating a new IP or not. But I think we're seeing that more and more. Yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially like, when it comes, I mean, but the idea that you're talking about is usually, I think most people that might be even listen to the podcast could not relate about the specialization, because most of my audience are not really like that professional level still. And it's, if I could, like, give an analogy of video games, like, in, for example, an RPG game like Skyrim, for example, have you played Skyrim?
Yeah.
All right.
A little bit too much, yeah.
Like, you did the main quest, all right, that's the main quest. But if we want to make an analogy to, this situation, all right, you get a job in the field, you're in the industry, you're established, all right, that's it, you've done the main quest. Like, by the way, of course, it's kind of subjective, the analogy I'm making. And when you've done the main quest, you want to do the side quests, you want to do the other stuff, you want to, I don't know. That's when it comes to, like, becoming a specialist in cloth or hair or stuff like that comes into play for me. I mean, personally, maybe, for example, from the get-go, you want to just go, I don't know, be a cloth specialist, or and set your foot in the industry that way. But I honestly haven't seen, like, much people who from start, like, they started from like a single thing. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I'm probably wrong, but from people who are like starting, like, They usually have to start from the basics. Then there's this whole thing of finding your niche personally, like the subject you want to work on, and and yeah, then do you know what I mean exactly what I'm trying to say? I'm kind of confused myself. um
I think it's good for people to find their niche
yeah.
early on, not too early on. You want people to have a chance to sort of explore left and right. Like we kind of talk about people being specialized in a T shape. I don't know if you've heard of that before. Like a T. Like you have deep knowledge within one, let's say, subfield of character art, but you also have knowledge across all of the different sub disciplines, if I can say that, of character art. So you want people who do find a niche, and often people get hired for that particular niche. Like there aren't a lot of people who choose cloth creation as a niche, but those who do usually get hired pretty quickly. I've heard leads at studios say, we are not hiring anyone anymore now that isn't really good as far as Mars designer is concerned, or cloth creation is concerned. So there's a lot of demand for that, and those who are really great at that tends to get hired. Like we say, people find your niche, but I think we can kind of pad that to a little bit. It's not just find your niche as in do whatever you want, but find something that you like. And then you're going to get a job. It's like find something that you like, but that is also in demand. You have to find the sort of intersection between a niche that you feel you could be very interested in doing, or in mastering, or in understanding for years on end, but that is also in demand. Because if you develop a niche and no one actually wants that skill, then no one's going to hire you for it, obviously, right? So you kind of have to find sort of the balance between these two things. So if you take, let's say, something like hard surface, that is a good niche in the sense that there's obviously a lot of hard surface projects that need that, of course, but it's also a niche that is somewhat saturated. There's a lot of people who do hard surface. It's a very interesting niche for a lot of people. Therefore, I think it's harder to break in a studio if you do hard surface than if you do something else as a niche, or if you choose something else, because of the saturation there. Creature creation may be the same thing. So you kind of have to find what it is about character art that you can become better at than other people, and then focus on that. And then often people will, and then focus on displaying that through your portfolio. And then people will look at that and be like, we need that person on our team because they have skills that we are lacking, or they simply know this better than like anyone else that we have on our team. Therefore, we need this particular person. But you still obviously need, through your portfolio, to show that you are able to do general character art as well. So you kind of have to think about that like a T-shape specialization there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I kind of confused what I was going to say. I mean, there are a lot of people who, like, from the get-go, they start specializing one thing and they become, like, super awesome at it. And of course, when you're super good at something, as you said, like, opportunities will show themselves. But I think there's also this issue, like, for example, I'm sure I'm not alone in this. For a lot of us who start early as an amateur, we start to like learn different concepts, and where I think it's what I'm trying to say kind of like makes sense in the context of like people who just started like recently, in terms of like 1 year or 2 year. And it's a bit harder to like, because there's so many niches you can just go with, when it comes to that. And especially like my problem has always been since I was a kid, I loved a lot of stuff. For most people, it's like they don't know what they like, they necessarily don't like anything. Yeah. But for me, I love everything. I love to learn ZBrush. I love to like hard surface. So I'm just going with the niches. So I try to choose my niche by the subjects I like, not necessarily the technical skill I need to work on. So and there's a saying called nowhere of many, master of none, something like that. That's a trap a lot of people can fall into. Like that's basically what I'm trying to like express right now. That this whole thing, which is like super like annoying, honestly, because you want to you want to get your portfolio and quality of work to a certain level so we can get commissions, then improve your portfolio, then go to industry, like the whole classic workflow of getting into the industry. But there's this kind of like mental pitfalls of like niches and all of that. But of course, we're going to talk about more stuff about this in the podcast as well. But do you have anything to add on to that?
No, I mean, I think what you said is very interesting there. I mean, we could talk about this for like quite a while there. Um, People have to find what is the value that they can bring to a studio that the studio cannot get anywhere else. I think that's true whether you're seen. I don't think it really matters. I think, in fact, it may even be easier for people to find a niche a bit later within their career. Like I think it's good advice for people when they start off to be like, okay, like when you start off, just focus on general character art, because that may be what you're hired for usually when you are a junior. If you're good enough to have a specialization and you really are kicking ass, then go for it, of course. But it may take years to develop that niche. So people who are looking for a job really quickly, it actually may be good advice to say, like, just focus on the fundamentals, focus on becoming good at general character art first, because there are a lot of jobs for that. But sooner or later, like you do, like you see a lot of seniors. I think of Marco Pluff, which you have mentioned at the start of the interview there. He's great at hard surface. He's great at creatures. That's mostly all he does now, right? Like you're not going to see him in Marvelous Designer. Like you're never going to see that. I mean, I say never, and he's just going to reply like, "Hey, look, I just opened Marvelous Designer and I moved a few points in here just for you." And so that may happen. Who knows? But like he's very specialized, right? And as a senior, it's very easy to do that, because once you have a job, then it's easy to take the time, take the years that you're going to need to really become really, really good at a very pointed topic, or to go more within design, which is also what people do. Like people have a tendency to start, they do just general, they just start by doing just general modeling, and then eventually they start adding on design, and then eventually they get even hired for that. They get hired to be a designer as opposed to be someone who does character art, as in modeling itself. I think of Furio Tedeschi was kind of the same thing. Like when he started, he was working in different video game studios, notably here in Montreal. And then eventually he just became a designer. So now he's hired for his design skills. So he's kind of specialized within a very particular kind of style of design, right? So people can find their niche later on. It gives them a bit more time to do so, a bit more relaxed. It's a very interesting topic. I think we can spend quite a lot of time on this.
Yeah, sure. But we're gonna return back to it, if the subject came up later. But now I want to ask another question, which is I think I always get interesting stories out of it as answers. What was the first paycheck you ever got out of art, and what was it for? When was it? And just how did you feel at the time when you got your first paycheck from art?
What was the first paycheck I got from art?
Doing art.
That was at IDOS Montreal. So I left. I studied at Centrenade here in Montreal. That was about a year to do 3D. To specialize in character art. That was only the last few months, but I was lucky enough to get hired straight out of school. So literally the week after I had graduated, I started at IDOS Montreal, and about 2 weeks later, I got my first paycheck, which is actually probably the most interesting story about that was that I mean, it's a very personal one. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there was my lead back then. I don't know if he's going to be happy that I'm actually saying this, but he used to organize poker games back at his house, and he was like, "Oh, so you got," and he knew that I liked poker. He did not get me into it, but he was like, "Oh, so you got your first paycheck. Why don't you come around for a job, for a game, And I said yes, and lo and behold, I actually won the game back at his house.
Nice.
So I made even more cash off of that cash I made for my first few weeks at IDOS Montreal. It was a small amount, but it was it's more the how can I say? It's not the amount that matters then, but the fact that that actually happened for me, But yeah, so that's kind of the story, Like I just left school, and the week after started at IDOS Montreal. A few weeks after that, I got my first paycheck.
And what was the first IP you worked on Datas?
It was Deus Ex. Started on
Interesting.
Human Revolution. It was a 5-year project.
Oh, nice.
Started as a junior. I started as a junior. I was. It's actually a funny story. Okay, I had very very strong imposter syndrome when I started. I know a lot of people experience that. Even after being seniors, like a lot of people will actually experience imposter syndrome. But I had like a really bad case of that when I started in the games industry. And at some point, that same lead, okay, I would see him like go into meetings from like time to time, and I wasn't invited. And of course, I wasn't. I was a junior, like I have nothing to do with whatever leads have to do. But somehow, like that was kind of playing in my mind. It's like my lead isn't there, and somehow he's kind of away, and I don't know what they're talking about. And like I would just make up all these irrational stories in my mind about the fact that somehow they were conspiring to kick me out of the studio soon. And at some point, after having been there for 8 months, I got invited to a meeting with my lead and HR within a meeting room, and I hadn't been notified of that previously. They were just like, "Hey, why don't you come for like a meeting?" I was so damn scared. I'm like, "That's it. I'm gonna get kicked out." Like it's been 8 months. It's been like I knew this was going to happen. My time here is done. So I go into the meeting. I'm just sweating bullets at that point. I'm like, what's going to happen? And they're like, "So Laura, we're here to talk about your role here at the studio." I'm like, "Oh my God, no!" And they're like, "We want to give you a promotion." I'm like, "Oh my God!" And so they actually had promoted me to like intermediate after like 8 months. They're like, "We feel you're really, really good, and we want you to know that. So here's a promotion." And I walked into that room. I'm like, "That's it. I'm done. I'm gonna get kicked out of here." And I actually walked out with like a few $1,000 more on my paycheck.
Nice.
So that was kind of interesting. I have to say that imposter syndrome stayed for many years many years longer, as it seems to do for quite a lot of people. But eventually that did subside.
All right, awesome. And speaking of industry and we've talked about a variety of subjects by now, but I want to ask you like a couple of questions. Which is right now we're at the section of the podcast which is called General Art Chat, which we go through some general art stuff that I want to like ask personally. And the first one I want to ask is about, of course, we talked about a lot of softwares right now: ZBrush, not Substance Designer, Marvelous Designer. That's another software. And all of that. But I was wondering about Blender. Do you see Blender becoming an industry standard in a couple of years? And have you worked with it, or just your whole general opinion on it?
Oh, that's a loaded question right there. That's like clickbait material. You just put that as like the thumbnail. Let's talk about Blender. You're gonna get a lot of clicks there. Yeah, that's a loaded question there. I don't know what's gonna happen to Blender. Okay, like we've seen it increase in popularity quite significantly over the years, of course. And we have therefore seen also a decline in the interest, let's say, in things like 3ds Max, Maya, these sorts of things. But at the same time, Maya especially doesn't really seem to want to go away. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's a few reasons for that. First of all, a lot of studios have built all their tools on Maya, and they're not going to just think of just giving that up easily. So Maya is definitely going to stick around, let's say, for the next 5 years, right? Like beyond 5 years, who knows what's going to happen? There's no way we can even predict something like that. But let's say for the next 5 years, Maya is not going to suddenly disappear to be replaced by Blender within studios. That being said, I do know studios who are slowly starting to use Blender a little bit, but those are usually smaller studios. I don't know about big studios, though. You can see, like, the other thing about having a software like Maya as opposed to Blender. First of all, when you think of studios, okay, studios have money to spend, so they don't care. I mean, they do care a little bit about the price of the licenses, but it's not for them an issue as it would be for someone who's just learning 3D and is kind of looking to pick up software, right? to learn how to do 3D art. So as far as studios are concerned, the price of the license of the software, of course, they would obviously like to get rid of that, but at the same time, what they get in exchange for that is a software that is perhaps a little bit more uniformly designed. Like, because what I hear about people who are seniors who use Blender, they feel as if Blender is a little bit everywhere. And it kind of makes sense because parts of Blender are developed by different people since it's open source, and so I haven't used Blender enough myself to comment on that, but that's what I heard from people. So whereas Maya, it's a little bit more like everything kind of talks to each other a little bit more within the software. So obviously, people who are programmers kind of like that kind of thing. People have to develop plugins and tools on top of the software for use within their own studio. And second of all, well, because you are also paying for Maya, it also means that you can expect a certain degree of support coming from the mothership if ever you run into problems, if ever you need support to develop something, to have something supported within the software for your own projects. Whereas for Blender, since it's open source, it's a bit harder to do that. Although I think there are people at the Blender Foundation, I may be wrong on this, but that are kind of reaching out to studios to kind of help them develop stuff. I think I've heard that. I may be wrong on that. Don't quote me exactly on that, but I think that may be happening. So yeah, so I don't, because of how kind of rooted Maya is within a lot of studios, because of the fact that it doesn't matter as much for studios as it does for people who are individuals. What is the price of the software? Because you can kind of expect a little bit more support coming from the parent company, because you are paying, of course, so you kind of have that sort of expectation there. I don't think we're gonna reach a point where Maya is gonna suddenly just disappear, but I do, as I said, I do hear about people in different studios talking about using Blender there, not necessarily as replacing everything and switching over to that, but kind of experimenting, seeing kind of where you can fit within their pipeline, perhaps using certain tools of Blender that they prefer to the ones within Maya. Maya is not a very good modeling tool. It's very good to sort of interface with everything else that you need on a production, but it's not necessarily a modeling tool per se. That is a really good one to use, So yeah, you're going to see these things coexist. You're definitely going to see more Blender, more used more within studios. But I don't know that you're necessarily going to see the death of Maya as people are kind of touting. At least not for the next 5 years. What happens within 5 years? Who knows? It's so far off there that it's kind of impossible to sort of predict that. But yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on that. I like Blender as a software, by the way. I think it's great that there is Blender there, that people have access to that. I think it's great that there are tools that are free that people can use that are great. I think it lowers the barrier of entry for people to get within character art. I think Blender is wonderful. I think it did great things for the industry. Anyone who wants to learn 3D art, that's a great tool to start with. Yeah, so that happens, but because people are using Blender doesn't necessarily mean when they're starting off that it necessarily is that you shouldn't expect to have to pick up other 3D software at some point, like Maya, if they want to work within a games industry or VFX. At the same time, like myself, I have hired, and I know studios who do that. We don't hire people because of how good they are with Blender or Maya or something. That never happens. It's like, oh, you model in 3ds. We love your portfolio. It's great, but you only use 3ds Max and you don't use Maya. We're not going to hire you. That never, ever happens. The whole debate of Blender and stuff like that. If your goal is to work within video game studios, go ahead, use Blender if that's what you want to use while you are learning 3D, while you are building your portfolio. Because people won't actually look at that; they'll simply look at how good you are at creating good characters and good character art. Are you technically savvy? Do you understand the challenges of creating characters for video games or for VFX? Do you know how to create good cloth? Are you a good sculptor? Do you understand what makes a character appealing from an artistic standpoint? Like all these questions are bigger questions than the software that you use. So what I have to say is just, use whatever you want. If you have to learn Maya once you get uh, into the games industry, you'll be taught Maya within your first few months within the studio.
By the way, thank you so much because you actually answered my another question I had, which was about could you break into the industry, like regardless of the software, which you basically just answered us. Thank you so much. And the thing is, because it's actually, believe it or not, it's a lot more common, this question in the heads of a lot of artists, upcoming artists, that they're like, oh my god, if I learn
Yeah.
Blender and do this, what if, but this is not this industry standard, what's gonna happen? I'm
Yeah.
never gonna get a job. No. But then of course, I mean, by the way, I heard like mixed things about this, but the thing you said seems like the most logical answer and a valid answer, because at the end of the day, the format of the files could easily be converted and uploaded into other third-party software. So what's the hassle having it? And there was another thing. Oh yeah, and the thing is about, for example, in a country where I used to live, right now I'm in Turkey. I'm Iranian. I'm from Iran. Because of the sanctions for like 3 decades now, like since the new government came in, we even if we want to, we can't buy, like, because of the sanctions, any softwares. And even if we wanted to buy the, because of the economy, like the situation, we can't buy, like, so basically we resort to pirating. And now where Blender like gets helpful is because it's free, it's open source. It opens actually a lot of like legit doors, because a lot of my friends, one of my other friends who's trying to learn animation with characters and stuff like that, is using Maya. And he told me that if you want to like start freelancing for a legit place, you need to actually have a licensed software or something like that. I'm not sure if that's like true. So is that actually true? Do the companies check?
That's a great question. Obviously, there's a difference between working in-house for studio and then being a freelancer, right? If you work in-house within a studio, you'll be provided all the licenses that you need. If you are working freelance, and that's a different question. There are often, obviously, like studios are wary of the idea that some of their team members may be using pirated stuff. And let's say that a company realizes, well, okay, pirated stuff may be a bit harder to prove, but there may be a concern there. It comes from a legitimate place of, doing business in a legitimate way when you are a studio and you actually, the last thing you want is to be sued because somehow you have used pirated software, or someone that you have worked with has used pirated software and therefore did not have the proper rights to create something. Um, I don't know that I have ever seen a lawsuit like that. Okay, but I have definitely seen lawsuits about things that were used in the context of a creation of a project. I think even okay. So there's the story I tried to Google a few years ago because I had heard it a few years before that, but somehow I couldn't find a link to that. But I'm sure I didn't imagine this. Okay, like there was a story about um, some outsourcing studio in China that did not have proper licenses. I don't remember the software. It could have been Maya, but I'm not actually sure what the software was. And they had worked on Avengers, like a movie, one of the Avengers movies. And there was something about either a lawsuit or that had been found out, and that created a bit of a firestorm. As I said, I tried Googling that like a few years ago because like maybe that was like over like 8 years ago that I had heard that story, maybe a bit less than that. Um, and somehow the parent company of the software that was used found out that the studio that had worked on that movie did not have licenses in house, proper legit licenses in house, and that created a whole firestorm because then it's like, well, so who owns like the movie, like the VFX shots that had been created for the movie? If those were created um, in a non-legitimate way, so studios are wary of that. That could create issues. Now, do studios check? Some do, some don't. Um, I've seen both happen. It's a bit of a coin flip whether someone's going to ask you about that. Someone may even ask you, and then even if you say yes, they may not actually check. That's bad advice to give people, but maybe that could happen. I don't know. So Yeah, like studios are wary because lawsuits do happen based on things that are not used in a legitimate way. I've also seen cases on a project I worked on in the past. I'm kind of wary of spilling too many details just about that because I don't know how secretive that is. But I'll just outline the bigger picture there. There was a texture that was used within a game. So this isn't a question of licenses, but it's a question of like actually proper rights when using something. There was a texture, a particular texture, like the most like meaningless texture, very small texture that was applied on a piece of paper somewhere within a game, and somehow and the person who had created that piece of texture had just grabbed a picture off the web and had just slapped it on their 3D model. Um, the person who created the texture saw his texture used within the game, and no, he hadn't been paid for it, of course, because no one had contacted him for that, and he actually sued the studio for that, which got settled, and excuse me, which got settled. And I don't know the details of how that got settled, but that actually happened. Um, so studios are very aware of that. Studios sometimes even have people on staff whose job it is to make sure that everything used, like the legal department will sometimes have someone on staff whose job it is to make sure that everything that is used, either by the internal team, by the external team, is is used in a legitimate way. That we actually have the rights for that. So yeah, that could happen. That could happen, and I do see that being a potential problem if you do freelancing. Yeah, I'm not sure what the solution is for that.
About China, like I think a lot of like actual big companies like Autodesk and Zebra. I don't know the parent company of ZBrush. I'm not sure, but basically a lot of official
Now it's
parent.
Maxon.
Oh, sorry, yeah, and like those companies probably have like branches in China as well. But when it comes to countries that are like heavily sanctioned, when there's no like branches or anything, I think it's much easier to get under the radar of that whole licensing thing. And yeah, I mean, yeah, Blender really made a lot of things easier about that because even for me, I like even my friends told me that you should also like learn industry standards. My friends who are already working professionally, by the way, not people who are at my level, they told me that you need to learn industry standard softwares like ZBrush and Maya and stuff like that because you can't just rely on um, Blender. And I mean, of course, ZBrush like has a lot of like clearly is much more superior like software compared to Blender when it comes to sculpting. I mean, no debate about that. And actually, I installed it. I'm learning it slowly. I even bought a course on Udemy. But about like Maya and other stuff, they told me that you shouldn't rely so much on Blender. But now that you said this, I'm kind of like relieved because I'm like, wait, I can just focus on and learn things with Blender.
Yeah, I may want to color what I said a little bit before. So I think it's good to make a distinction between working in house and working as a freelancer. Like what I said before about software doesn't matter is really about people who are hired in house. Because when you hire someone to work in house on big production, you expect them to stick around for a few years. You'll have them on staff for like a few years, and you really want to develop a quality relationship with them. You want to invest in them so that they really become, like everyone is kind of hired for their strengths and also fully knowing what their weaknesses are. So and not knowing, let's say, Maya may be a weakness, but it's usually a very easy one because you can usually train someone to be good at Maya within a few months' time. When you're hired to work within a video game studio, you shouldn't expect to be productive or to serve the team for the first 3 months at least, maybe even 6 months. Like you'll be sucking out energy as opposed to injecting energy. Now, I don't mean that literally, okay? Like having juniors is great because it really boosts the morale of a lot of people because they're so jumpy, they're so happy to be there, of course. But what I mean is that obviously, like someone who is hired, even if you're a senior, okay, like it's still probably going to take 3 months just to ramp up until you're to the point where you are actually being an added value to like the team. Because you have to learn what the engine is, what the pipeline is. You have to learn to work with people. You have to learn what are the specific requirements of that project. So there's quite a lot if you're a senior that goes to working somewhere else. So obviously, like within those first 3 months, picking up Maya is not that big of a deal. So when you work in house, it doesn't really matter. If you're doing freelance, that may be a problem because obviously people, if in the end you're able to deliver a Maya file, people probably won't care as much. People don't care about the tool that you've used to deliver a particular product, right? Like if you're making a character, what matters in the end is the file that you're going to give them. But obviously, if a whole team is using Maya, I'd probably expect you to give them a Maya file, perhaps. They're not going to like ask, okay, have you used Blender along the way? They're not going to check you for that, of course. So I think knowing a little bit, if you're doing freelance, you obviously need to know a little bit enough about Maya that you can use the data that they're giving you, and you can give them data that is of comparable quality in return. Now, whether you're getting a Maya file, you're exporting it out of Maya, you're using Blender because that's what you really know how to use to do your modeling, and then afterward you're throwing it back within Maya to give it to them, that's all fine. They won't even know that actually happened, right? So in that context, you don't really need to know Maya in depth, but you need to know it at least enough that you can interface with the team in an effective way. Because when you hire people for freelance, you don't expect to train them on things. They're supposed to be ready to go, because you're not hiring them for the in-house staff.
Oh yeah, definitely. And the next thing I want to ask is actually something that I've been recently, been dealing with a lot, which I think is actually a super important subject for not just me, anyone, any artist, basically. The dreaded creative block. And
okay, yeah.
I know I kind of hate this subject, but I need to get as much info from different people as possible to get an insight on how to deal with it, like basically to not feel guilty of not being productive, but also wanting to do something that's actually productive. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Sure,
how
yeah.
how do you usually deal with this?
Okay. I have a book recommendation for the people watching this.
All right, awesome.
Give me a second.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Here's how you solve creative block.
A skill like an artist.
Yeah, either that, or actually I have a different one on this. This is also a great book on the topic. It's so good that I even have 2 of those. This is a great book. Okay?
Nice.
So I've read this particular book, and I've read the other one that I've mentioned before. So this is Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. How do you solve creative block? Well, what I've kind of realized through reading these things is that white page syndrome is only a syndrome because you start with a white page. If you didn't start with a white page, you probably wouldn't have white page syndrome. So, when we do art, we are building art often. Art is a dialogue. Art between people who create art. Art is a response to what other people have done in the past in terms of art. If you look historically through artistic movements, you'll see that they all are a bit of a response to the one that came before that. If you look at the Renaissance, okay, like I love Renaissance art. I went to Florence twice to look at the great sculptures of Michelangelo, great sculptures of all the people there that have really made that part of our artistic history like something that was incredibly interesting and it's one of the best periods in terms of art, in terms of sculpting there. Because before that, what came before the Renaissance was a lot of art that was very religious in nature. It was art that was very didn't care too much about concepts like perspective, actually getting anatomy proper, these sorts of things. Everything was really, really flat, right? So then the Renaissance was a bit of a response to that, where people have started to say, like, hey, like, why don't we actually start, like, actually either sculpting or painting human bodies the way that they're supposed to be depicted in, like, real life with proper perspective and anatomy and all that stuff, right? So that was a big focus during the Renaissance. And then after a few years, after a few decades, I'm not sure how long the Renaissance really lasted, but eventually we transitioned over to Baroque art, right? And Baroque art was a response to the Renaissance because during the Renaissance, everything was very posed. Everything was very perfect, like everything was there wasn't a lot of dynamism necessarily within the pose. Everyone was doing like a contrapposto pose and stuff like that. And so people who were sculptors and painters and stuff back then, they were like, okay, so like this is getting a bit boring. Everyone's creating the same kind of poses for their sculptures. Why don't we go and create something more dynamic, right? So they kind of looked at what was done and they kind of thought, okay, how do we create something new, something fresh? Anyway, so I'm kind of going into a parenthesis here, but art is a response to what came before it. Often, so had the people who I created Baroque art started from a blank page, they probably would not even have known what to create. But since they were kind of creating something that was a response to what came before them, they kind of looked into what was done then, and they kind of thought, okay, how can we do something different? Impressionistic paintings are the same thing. It's like these very beautiful paintings, lots of colors. That was a response to all this very realistic art that was painted before then. So, yeah, like you start from something like, and this is something that I've kind of learned through the books I have shared here. Like you look at what is done. Here's one of the processes that you can use to create art. You look at what is done. So you start from something that already exists, and then you kind of ask yourself, how can I transform that into something new? How can I make something new and fresh that is different, but that also is kind of a callback to what was there? So yeah, like if we bring that back to 3D or like 2D, right? Like you can start, let's say, just on browse on like browse the portfolios of people that you really like the art that they have created, and then think of, okay, how can I perhaps create something a little bit like that, but also a little bit different? How can I make something that's going to be my own, but that is also callback to the things that I really appreciate about what they have created? Browse on like ArtStation, look at what is done there. Think, okay, how can I make something a little bit different? What inspires me and what is there? And then how do I create something that will be different enough that it doesn't look like a duplicate of what was there? How can I make it my own? How can I change it enough that I'm saying something unique and interesting that people haven't necessarily said before? So that's a way to get rid of blank page syndrome or white page syndrome. Just don't start from a white page. Look at what is there already and think of how can you create something a little bit different, a little bit new, a little bit fresh. Maybe you can create a different design. Maybe you can play with proportions. If you see all these realistic faces depicted everywhere, how about you do something a little bit more cartoonish, a little bit more caricatural? How can you create something that has a little bit more style to it? Like, and I think when we look at art too, I think, or like people who do 3D art, often the people who stand out of the crowd are those who do have their own style, which does go back to what we were saying about finding your own niche and like stuff like that. People who create stuff that's a little bit different than everyone else are the people who usually rise up from from like the noise, like the background noise of everyone who's kind of creating art. Like I'm thinking of specifically, like one of the artists I really love is Maria Panfilova. If you look at the art that she creates these sculptures within ZBrush that are still very textural. They're very dynamic, and then she does like some stuff with poly painting. Maybe she uses Substance to do the texturing. I don't know, but they're like her renderings are often somewhat flat. There's a lot of use of blacks, but also lots of use of colors as well. There's this kind of really nice mix of colors and blacks in there. And I can't help but feel very inspired when I look at that, and to look at that and to ask myself, okay, let's say next sculpture that I want to do, how can I incorporate a little bit of that? Not enough for it to be a replica of what she's doing, but enough of it that I'm kind of creating my own response to what she's creating. And so I find her art very fascinating, very inspiring to look at, and I'm not afraid to I'm not afraid to steal good ideas, from what she has done, from what other people have done. I'm not afraid to say, okay, I really love what they have done here. Therefore, I love that enough that I'm going to incorporate that within my own designs. But I'm, again, going to make it different enough that it also winds up being my own, But art is like, we are building art on top of all the art that was done before us. And therefore, um, I if that's what we are doing, then let's actually not kid, uh, uh, let's be straight here. Like, if that's what we are doing, then let's let ourselves be um, um, be let's steal what is there that we like, steal not too much of it that it becomes a replica, but still just enough that we are paying, um, that what we are doing is still creating something that is new in the end. Anyway, that's a very long answer, but I hope that is a satisfying one.
Yeah, it is actually. It reminds me of something. I used to, like, for a while, back, like around like a couple of months ago. I found this really cool brush on Photoshop that I like. I was looking at the dreaded white canvas and I didn't know what to do, and I just, I started like scribbling with my, tablet pen, and I just looked back and I zoomed in on the scribble. I was like, that's an interesting shape. I did a whole page and I came up with a bunch of like blockouts and shapes of like cool spaceships. And actually, one of them turned out to be my first ever 3D model I ever done, like in like late 2021 with Blender, which at the time I didn't know anything about 3D or Blender itself. And I just, yeah, that's actually another good method, because there was another person who came on my podcast, Wouter Gort. I don't know if you know him. He goes by the name of Wookie on Instagram. And he also said the same thing. Like, he had a professor which said, just do random meshes of shapes and try to find, like,
cool.
see out of it. And but yeah, even with all this being said and done, I mean, yeah, sure, you can come up with something, but I don't know, maybe it's just me but I'm always like, if I don't do something that's gonna eventually lead to my improvement in my skill and the improvement in my portfolio in general, I kind of feel guilty. So yeah, I mean, of course, I mean, I can make something, sure, and like, stay on the software, maybe learn a new tips and tricks. But in the end, there's that feeling of, all right, it's like you're forcing yourself to be creative in a sense, But yeah, I mean, it's a bitch. What can we say? Creative block sucks.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, like you hear a lot of people who are like, I absolutely have to start from like nothing. And there are definitely techniques like the one that you have mentioned that really does allow for that. Obviously, that's more, I think, into the realm of design. But for me, like, if I look at people who do concept art, not all of them, of course. Some people do like to like draw on a white page, of course. But even then, they are drawing on a white page, but they are heavily inspired by other things. Like one of the concept artists that I love the most, and he's an amazing human being. He's one of the best. Like, starts from a white page usually. Like, he just likes to draw on like white pieces of paper, but you can see through his art a lot of his inspiration, which a lot of it is Evangelion. So he's not afraid to look at Evangelion, look at the designs that are in there, and he's kind of thinking, okay, how can I draw something that's kind of a bit inspired from that? And maybe he's going to steal a few design ideas from like left and right. So for me, it's like surround yourself by art that you appreciate. Even if you start from a white page itself, even if you start by drawing sort of abstract shapes, and in there you try to spot the character, like allow yourself to surround yourself. By the way, I haven't said the name of the guy. It's actually, I have a bit of a blank right now because I'm speaking so much that his name actually kind of escapes me right now. God, that's embarrassing. Give me a second and I'll think of his name. Haven't spoken to him in like a while. That's why. Oh God, if the name comes back, I'll let you know.
Sure,
Maybe
no
you
worries,
can
no worries.
like write it down on like on
A
top of the
subtitle.
video or like something.
I will. Don't worry.
Anyway, so yeah, so I do apologize, my friend, if I don't remember your name right now.
No worries at all.
No, yeah, just like surround yourself by things that you like, Like if you're trying to find the character within the shape, as you have described, I think that's a really cool thing to do. But it would still help if you're kind of surrounding yourself. Maybe you have created a few mood boards that you have open at the same time on a different monitor, and that are things that are kind of going within a direction that you already like in terms of design, or art that someone else has created that you really appreciate. And then I think seeing that, having that in the back of your mind, having it very fresh within your mind, and then trying to find the character within the shape that you are drawing, it's going to come a bit easier if you do that. Like you're going to be able to find the shapes in there that you like that are kind of also a little bit inspired by what you are seeing on the side. You need to feed something to your creative brain. It needs to have something to chew on to start. So that's what I would say. The other thing, of course, is that people who do a lot of concept, whether 2D or 3D, often do kit bashing, or will often also start from, like you see a lot of people who do concept art who will photo bash. Not everyone does that, but sooner or later, people who do concept art do call upon that as a technique. Photo bash together a bunch of stuff. A lot of people like to, let's say, create hard surface character designs based off of things like motorcycles. So they'll have, let's say, pictures of pictures of motorcycles, and they'll just start to cut in there, like cut little pieces of the motors or something else that they actually kind of really like about the design, the shape of the motorcycles, and they'll just start to move that within Photoshop. They're like, okay, like how about I take this? If I put it there, if I rotate it, can I create a shoulder with this? Can I create something else? And so they kind of use that as a way, as a starting base, and then they draw on top of that to obviously not make it look like just a motorcycle that was copy pasted, but they build their design on top of that afterwards. So they let that base kind of inspire them as they go on. People who do 3D art, who do concept, will often do the same thing. Like a few years ago, and it probably still is very, very popular. All those the kit bash kit or kits that Vitaly Bulgarov had created there. I think it was called Black Phoenix. A lot of people bought that, and I've seen a lot of people simply use that. It's like, oh, I need something somewhere. I need a leg, a hard surface leg. I'll just start from whatever he like, all the little pieces he has done, and I'll just try to like see if I move them somewhere, can I create something kind of interesting? So you don't always have to start from nothing. Even if you do 3D concept art, you can obviously start from you can kit bash together something interesting, and then afterward, once you have the rough design down, then you add things on top. Like you're going to get your creative juices flowing. Then you're going to build on top of that afterwards to make it something different enough that it doesn't look like what it has started as. But it goes back to that idea of start from something. Like you have to start from an idea somewhere, and it's okay for that idea not to come fully from you in the beginning.
All right, and thank you so much. That was a lot of nice methods and answers in terms of like how to deal with creative. Like I'm sure a lot of people who are listening will also appreciate that they can implement them in their everyday life when it comes to art. And yeah.
By the way, sorry to cut you off there.
No
the
worries.
name of the guy is Nivan Shantara. By the way,
Nivan. All right, Nivan Shantara. All right, I'll add it in. I actually wrote down the timestamp, and I need to add the subtitle first. No worries.
Okay. Just to let you know there,
yeah.
For your people watching, of course.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Another thing I wanted to actually mention and go through with on the podcast was also Outgang, which we're going to talk about it now. About even before we started recording a podcast, you talked about the whole as a subject we could discuss was how to manage being your own boss, and also the whole work-life balance and all that. Before we get into that, I need to actually give a shout out to the Outgang website and the content that's on there. And
thank you so much.
It's trusted by Chaos Masons. For anyone who's in the 3D world, they know who they are. 80 level, 3D scan source, Ubisoft, and there's also a lot of cool assets. Listen, if you want to become a 3D character artist, you have to go check it out. I mean, I'm not good with characters. It's not going to be useful for me, but it's probably useful for you. So go check it out. There's also mentorship spots yet for if you want to. For hair creation mentorship, character creation mentorship, which I think character creation mentorship seems really awesome if you want to get specifically get into character art. But of course, if you later want to get specialized more, you can go to hair creation set as well. By the way, I only shout out things that I think is actually high quality and it's actually worth the shout out. By the way, like I'm not getting a sponsor, I'm not getting paid. I'm just saying this for like transparency's sake to the viewers and listeners. And yeah, there's that. And so let's get into the subject of Outgang. Tell us the story of it and the whole thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Thanks for the shout out, by the way. I do appreciate that.
My pleasure.
The story of Outgang is that so I've been a character art teacher for I don't know, about 10 years at this point. I think I started teaching character art when I was in 2012, I believe. I graduated from that in 2008, by the way, for those who keep track of the time there. So after 4 years, I was between intermediate and senior, and I got called by my old school because they were looking for a character art teacher, and they kind of knew that somehow I liked to share knowledge. So they kind of invited me for that, and I said yes. It was a natural fit for me. So I've been teaching character art for about a decade at this point. And I've also taught other places. I've taught for CGMA as well. Well, the story of Outgang, there's a few different reasons why I started it. First of all, I wanted to just try to be my own boss. I wanted to try to see what happens if I start my own business. I kind of wanted to do that. Like when you work with video game studios, I love the time that I work within studios, but at the same time too, like after having worked in video game studios for like, I don't know, 12 years, I think, the thought kind of went through my mind, like, okay, like, I'm always working for someone else, like, could I work for myself and try to build something for myself instead? So it was that kind of desire there to own something, to not always work for someone else as opposed to work for myself, that kind of got me to think about, okay, can I start a business? That sounds like a good idea somehow. And then I'm like, okay, so I want to start a business. What can I start a business in? Well, I'm pretty good at teaching, or at least that's what everyone is saying to me. So why don't I start a teaching business? Like, why don't I try to like teach people? And at the same time, so the price of Outgang is very low. Okay, so it's $10 a month, and the reason why it's only $10 was because I really wanted to simply price it as low as I possibly could, because like I taught for CGMA, I taught at like different places. The price of 3D education online is often very expensive. To get access to people who have a lot of experience in different domains. So I thought, like, okay, like, I don't I don't like that education is something that is expensive. Somehow that kind of goes against my own personal beliefs. Like I think education should be inexpensive, perhaps even free. Outgang is not free because if it was free, I wouldn't be able to keep on doing it, so unfortunately, like we don't have any sponsors. I don't have anyone. Like I would love to get like video game studios. If there's people working in video game studios here and you would like to sponsor us, you would like to have your name and your studio brand on top of the content that I do, that would be great. Like I would love for for the website to be free, but the reality is that I cannot, that's not possible. If I had a call, I can probably say this. I had a call from Vimeo a few weeks ago. They're like, actually, you're a little bit too popular. You're kind of using a little bit too much video bandwidth there. We have to like increase your price by 5 times just to cover like the bandwidth cost. I'm like, oh my god. So I'm in talks with them to see that, to try and reach an agreement there, but the reality is that there are costs that come with teaching, of course, and since I live off of this now, of course, I have to charge people for that. But I try to keep the price as low as I can to make sure that people have access to really quality education and that they can try to improve themselves. They can perhaps even aspire to get a job within the games industry if that's what they are looking for the lowest possible price there, because that is simply in line with my own personal just what I
belief
Thank you.
system.
Yeah, thanks for that. So that's kind of the whole story. It's like, can I be my own boss? Can I try to start my own business? Can I try to teach? Can I try to bring people quality education for a fraction of what they would pay for somewhere else? And so far, the response has been actually pretty positive. Like I started Outgang 2020, I think, yeah, I believe, and we're in 2022, and I'm still here. So it means that things are actually going good enough for me to keep on going. Um, so that's kind of the story. I'm looking to expand Outgang. Right now, I'm more or less the only teacher there. I'm definitely interested in bringing other people on the platform to teach as well. That's part of my goals. But unfortunately, I'm also a victim of um, my own beliefs, which is that I don't make enough money to pay other people to come and teach on the platform. So I'm kind of looking to like solve that eventually. But still, I'm super glad that I started the platform. The response to it so far has been extremely positive. Everyone has said great things about it, and I'm super happy for that. It's important for me that people get a lot more out of the membership there than what they have to pay for it. Because then that means that I'm actually doing something right, and that I'm doing something that is good for the world there. Um, so that's kind of the story. Like right now we've been, I've been, like I say we because I like to kind of say that, but truth be told, it's really just me. I've been recording quite a lot of classes on a lot of different topics related to character art. I also manage the website itself. Like I've built the website myself. I've learned programming, like web programming. That's another one of the things that I do now because I was like, yeah, I need a website. I don't want to pay someone for that. How much does it cost to make a website? Oh, it's a few $1,000s. I can learn 3D or I can learn programming, of course. So I kind of had that mentality in like the beginning, and then like a few months later, I'm like, what did I get myself into to learn like how to build a website? I probably should have paid someone to do that for me. If I was to do it again, I would definitely do that. But yeah, I mean that's just part of my personality. Like I look at challenges and I'm always like, I can solve that. I don't know, like it's gonna be easy. You'll see, it's gonna be easy to learn X, Y, or Z. Um, and then invariably, when I try to learn these things, then it's always like, oh, actually, this feels a lot more complicated than I thought. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the story. Like that's the story behind the website. I guess it's ups and downs so far, but yeah, we are going strong, and we're going to stick around for the long haul.
All right, awesome. And you guys are. Is it possible that you might branch out into other areas? Like, is it going to be specifically for characters and character art and the whole area, or it might branch out into other stuff? Do you see it that way?
Yes, I would like to. That goes back to that idea of you know uh, the chicken or the egg problem of and like I want to hire people to come and teach on the platform other topics other than character art or other than the character art topics that I currently teach. Um, but then I need money to pay them, of course. So obviously, the membership on the website has been steadily increasing through time, and I'm very, very blessed about that. Very grateful for everyone who has joined so far. But so we'll reach a point where I'll find a solution for that, and I'll definitely bring more people on the platform. That is my goal. It's part of where the name of the company also comes from. Like the word gang is not just me. It's like should be other people as well. So that is definitely the goal. I want to, I want to grow this where there are more people teaching on the platform. Not just character art, even right now, that is the specialization. But eventually, yeah, if we can get like people who teach either concept art, environment, these sorts of things, I'll be certainly glad to do that. I guess in a way, this is also a call to people who would like to come and teach on the platform. Like if you are interested in helping to grow Outgang, if you are a specialist in something in related to 3D art and you think you could be a really good fit to come and teach on the platform and you're interested in helping the platform grow, and definitely you're going to get a cut as far as that's concerned, of course. I don't ask people to work for free. Um, if you think you have something that you can bring there and you want to really get in on the ground floor, because that's really where we are right now. Like I still consider that we're a startup, even though we started like a year and a half ago. Because we're still at that level. Like most people I talk to, they don't even know uh, what a website even is or the content that is there. So definitely um, uh, there's a lot of growth there. That's going to come within the future. But yeah, if you are someone who think that you can actually contribute classes on a particular topic, and you would like to help the company grow, you would like to, obviously also be compensated for the time that you're going to put in there, come and talk to me, and we'll see if we can work something out for sure.
All right, awesome. But the link of the YouTube channel is down in the description. If you even go click on the video section of the video channel, you can see there's a boatload of really high quality content on there. In terms of quality production, in terms of like the subject matter itself. I recently found the channel myself as well through the video I told you already, and here we are on a podcast. And yeah, so definitely check it out. Honestly, if you're into 3D, you'll don't want to miss it. And with that being said, a really interesting subject I wanted to ask you and talk to you about on the podcast, which was it's in a sense a broad question. It's one of those loaded questions, which is what? I'm
Uh-oh.
making it a lot suspenseful. What makes a good character? In terms of technicality of making and modeling and all that. But later on, we're going to also talk about what makes a good character. It's like an extra stuff, like in terms of writing, all right?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that question, by the way. I love like open questions like that. In fact, like I used to like interview people because I was a lead for like a few years at different studios. That's one of my favorite questions. Just what makes a good character? Like it's a very simple question. But truth be told, a lot of people actually have a hard time to answer that question. And actually, that was a great way to filter potential hires at different studios if they could come up with an interesting answer to that very simple question. Because you actually find a lot of people who do character art have a hard time to answer that. You know, now some people do think of things like, it has to be technically like. I think for me, the answer I like to give to that, and the answer certainly I like to hear, and that is certainly a good answer in an interview context is, a good character is a character that is both technically well realized and artistically interesting. But then the question is, okay, so then how is something technically well realized and artistically interesting, which becomes the sub questions that then become very interesting, of course. And so a good character is, if we talk about the technical side of things, right? A character is a good character, or good character art is a character from a technical standpoint that is realized in a way that it respects and is optimized for the target that it is created for. What I mean by that is, you don't expect the modeling of a character for VFX to be made in the same way that you expect the modeling for a character made for games. So a good character is a character whose technical creation respects the medium, respects the target that it is meant to be for. So if you do a character for video games, then you expect to have to have a decent polygon count. You expect to have edge loops that are proper for deformation, because your character is going to deform, of course. So you have to take that into consideration. So you have to think about how will the character be used, and how is it technically created in a proper way for that to be solved properly. So optimized mesh. It's not important that everything is made of quads if you're doing it for video games. You can definitely have triangles in there, but they have to be placed. They have to be justified. It's okay to have triangles as long as you can say why you have added a triangle somewhere. But you still want to have a uniform vertex distribution as much as possible. You don't want to have vertices all over the place and have places where the vertices are very close and other places where the vertices are very far away, because that doesn't really create good skinning afterward. You want a relatively uniform, like the vertices that are clustered together in part of a character all have to be kind of somewhat uniformly spaced out. That's kind of how I like to think about it. Although you can have differences in density of vertices over the surface of a character. It's okay, and it's in fact usually a good thing for the head of a character to have a denser mesh than, let's say, the bottom of the character, the shoes of a character, the feet of the character, because usually it's you want to have your polygons where it matters, which is usually the portrait of a character, because that's usually what people will see there. So all that goes into a properly modeled character from a technical standpoint. So that goes within making a good character, right? Then the second thing is from an artistic standpoint, what makes a good character? Well, artistically pleasing means for me telling a story through the character, first of all. Like when you create a 3D character, it has to, their clothes, their proportions, the details you put on them has to tell a story that people will think is interesting. You know, um, the story that you tell through the character has to be in line with the basic bio of the character. Of course, if a character has been written in a way so that they're a little crass, they don't take care of themselves, they don't wash themselves, let's say, for some reason, obviously you want the artistic side of things to reflect that. You want to add a little bit dirt here and there, you want to play with the roughness, you want to make the hair a little bit matted, you want to make the hair a little bit glossy, these sorts of things, because it's a little bit oily, right? So you want to play with these parameters, which goes back to the technical side of things too, of course, a little bit, but you want to tell a coherent story through the character art that you create based on who the character is supposed to be at large within either the game or the movie there, um, artistically, for me, is also goes back to the idea of artistic fundamentals. We don't think of that enough, perhaps, when we do 3D character art, because that's usually in the realm of those who do concept art, right? To like think of the artistic fundamentals, okay, like let's say the colors, or having zones of details over the character and having zones of rest. Like sure, it's usually more something that the concept artist will think about, but in terms of a 3D artist, you still have responsibility to kind of know these things and to express these things properly, to kind of look at a concept and to know, okay, there aren't any details, because this is supposed to be a zone of rest, because this is next to a zone that's very busy over the character, where we want to draw the eye of the viewer. Therefore, you have to be able to observe those zones of rest on the concept, and you have to make sure that you are keeping those. Like a piece of cloth over the concept that is devoid of details may be a piece of cloth that is there to serve as a zone of rest. So if you go in there and you start sculpting a crazy amount of folds and a crazy amount of memory folds, and you start splashing in there a bunch of dirt within the textures afterward, you may be destroying that zone of rest that the concept artist has purposefully created to create a sense of balance in the concept, right? So all of those are artistic challenges. They're artistic considerations that I think someone who does 3D art still has to be aware of and has to keep in mind while they are creating their 3D characters. So a good character is also a character who respects those artistic fundamentals of design. Um, Obviously, and it goes without saying that there's a whole thing of being well sculpted and stuff that I'm sure everyone kind of thinks about. It's like, yeah, obviously the ZBrush sculpt has to be of a high quality, but that's an answer I'm sure everyone sort of intuitively thinks about there. Yeah, if you're making something that is realistic, there has to be realistic credibility to it, of course, in terms of cloth folds, these sorts of things. At least to the degree that the viewer will be able to appreciate. Not, cloth. I know I've been speaking a lot about that, but it's quite on my mind these days, right? Like, obviously, you don't expect the player to play a game in the end to be an expert in terms of cloth creation and folds and stuff like that. Some are, but most aren't. So obviously, it's okay to not be 100% credible when it comes to the cloth that you're creating, but you have to be credible enough that the end player who will play your game, who will watch your movie, doesn't feel like there's something wrong with the cloth, obviously. So that credibility and thinking about the credibility of what you are creating is important, but also not being so strict on the credibility that you are destroying any sense of artistic expression. There's a fine line there. There are people who are like, this has to be 100% anatomically correct, let's say, and although I think anatomy is something that we have a bit less leeway, the fact still remains that when we create things for a medium, for video games, for movies, these sorts of things, we are not necessarily trying to replicate reality 100%. We are trying to idealize reality a little bit, right? Which is a very charged topic in and of itself, because obviously, if you look at publicities of people who look like perfect models, that creates problems in society, of course. But the fact still remains that when we create heroes, we want our characters to look like a hero, right? We don't want them to look like they've just been randomly grabbed off the street and then scanned and then put within a game or something. We want to create heroes. We want to create inspiring people. We want to create an idealized representation of human beings in a way, right? And idealization may also go the other way. Like I'm thinking of like Dune. Okay, that's a really awesome movie there. I think of gosh, I don't remember the name of the villain in there, but maybe you have seen it.
Yeah, I've seen it, but oh yeah, the Harkonnen guy, the fat guy that levitates.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So obviously, like he's an exaggerated, glutinous kind of person, right? I mean, I'm not even sure if he's a person or an alien at that point, but who cares about that? But he's idealized in his in the way that he is represented, even if it's represented in what we want to be a somewhat negative way for the audience. Like we don't want to look at him and kind of sympathize with him. We want the audience to look at him and feel like, oh, like that guy is kind of a little bit repugnant on the sides, right? So for me, idealization is something that goes both ways. And it's something that we obviously want to usually strive towards when we create characters, which means not often sticking 100% to reality, but kind of embellishing reality a little bit there. So a good character is also a character who is idealized in the right direction, in the right way, is idealized to convey the kind of emotions that we want the viewer or the consumer in the end to appreciate.
Yeah, even like a good, really fresh example of that would be like the new villain of the new upcoming Thor movie, like Love and Thunder. Like Christian Bale is actually playing it. They're kind of similar as well. Like the villain, as you said, it has this characteristics of like kind of exaggerated. Like normally, like generally, when people see a character like that, they're not probably thinking, "Oh, it's probably a hero." No, it's a villain. Obviously, he looks like this maniacal, sadistic guy. He's the God Butcher or something. I don't know. It's been so long I haven't watched a Marvel movie, so I'm not up. Like I haven't caught up with the stories, but yeah, your point actually stands very well. And here's another thing about what. It's actually an extra question. We've talked about what makes it in terms of design perspective and all that, what makes a good character, but in terms of writing, in your personal subjective opinion, like what are some of your memorable characters you still remember and cherish?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, writing is obviously not my specialty there, but like if I think of writing, I just think of characters. I think characters have to be written in a way that the audience will appreciate them. They have to have an air of relatedness or relatableness to them. I'm not sure that's a proper English word right now, but right there. But I think you know what I'm meaning. Like I think even a villain has to be relatable to a certain extent. There has to be something that makes them human enough that you are able to not feel attached to them, but they're not, they're not an object. There's something about them that evokes an emotion in you, and they will evoke an emotion in you if they have a certain human side to them to a certain degree. So I think the writing has that challenge, to kind of convey that, to make people both relatable but also heroic or villainous, to kind of strive that balance between not making them so unrelatable to the audience that that no one can actually connect with them. Um, but also, obviously, telling the story that you want through them, of course, I think that's a really big key for me, like making a character relatable. Even if you're trying to make a villain, you still have to give them a little bit of something, either within, displaying a human flaw, perhaps, um, that people can somewhat relate to, but kind of magnifying it in a way that it makes it villainous, but that is still relatable enough that people can feel like, oh, I kind of like I see where that desire comes from. Like I'm thinking of like Thanos, right? Who's kind of like you think of him and like throughout the Avengers movies, you see his life a little bit. Like you see what has happened to him. You see his background enough so that he's not just like a flat kind of villain, right? There is a little bit of depth to them. You can kind of empathize a little bit with how he became the villain that he is, not to excuse, erasing half of the world population or the universe's population. Spoilers, I'm sorry, but hell, everyone has seen that movie at this point. But just so that you can understand where it comes from, and it just magnifies the emotions that you feel throughout the movie a little bit there. Yeah, I think that is what creates the characters that I tend to get attached to. Now if you ask me about a character that I am attached to, well, people will know that I have an undying love for Mads Mikkelsen. I have a huge crush on the guy. I love everything that he does. There's just obviously something about Mads Mikkelsen's a very interesting character because he plays these very complex characters. In a way, he's almost even perhaps the antithesis of what I have said. Perhaps, although perhaps not, because he, like a role that I really like is Hannibal, from the TV series. I loved him in Casino Royale. I usually love him in everything that he does, but I think like he's definitely an interesting character to break down. I don't think that I necessarily associate with Hannibal, okay, with like the character there, but Mads Mikkelsen, there's something just so interesting, obviously about his face, but also the way that he acts, his kind of demeanor,
I think.
demeanor.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
No problem.
There's just something so goddamn interesting about the guy. I have a hard time to put my finger on it. Why? But
Yeah,
he
actually,
just plays these. He's so. I just love to see him.
there's
Like,
an aura with some people, like even with like
Yeah.
Mads Mikkelsen, as you said, like there's like a package of the look, the way his eyes like move, like his, I think, lip is a bit has a like a interesting shape, and it's a
He's very
signature. It's
charismatic.
unique. Yeah.
Yeah.
And about I nearly forgot something about the writing. I think the point you said about the villains being relatable is super important, because like it's gonna sound a bit funny, the examples I'm gonna give, but it's actually legit true. The villains in Kung Fu Panda series, like I'm not kidding, they're so well written. If you go look at the backgrounds and their motivations and all that, like they're so they're so well written, honestly. And there's that. And next question. And by the way, do you want to add anything related to the previous subject?
No, I was gonna actually ask you what you think is a good example of like a character that you either relate to or that you find very appealing, either from a writing standpoint or something else. Because this really isn't my field, but I know that you're quite interested by that. So you probably have a few suggestions of villains
sure.
or characters that you find especially appealing.
Wow, it's like one of those questions that you have a lot of answers, but you kind of get overwhelmed at the spot. But
Well,
all right.
you just asked me the question, so I'm just returning a favor to you.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, when it comes to in general well-written characters, one of my favorite characters is Guts from the Berserk anime and manga.
Nice.
Do you know that?
I know of Berserk. I haven't really read the manga, but
basically the Kentaro Miura's works, which is it's a pity that it got unfinished because he sadly passed away. like I think 2 years ago, right? I think if I'm not mistaken, but recently. And for me, a character that's well written is a character that the whole backstory is being taken into consideration by the writer. Like, not necessarily, I don't mean that every aspect of their life should be shown or displayed or depicted in any form of media that they're being depicted at, but hints and like subtle hints about their personality traits should be, if they're shown, even the viewer or listener or the reader, without them knowing, they're like, oh my god, why I'm so, they're like, attached to this character. It's because it feels real. Like, and for that to happen, the writing should be done by someone who is very well versed in terms of, like, personality disorders, mental disorders, and a whole, like, these stuff. If you add, it adds a little bit of depth to your character, which will subconsciously shows itself. Like, most of the characters, yeah, I could say actually all the characters basically in the Berserk anime and manga, like especially Guts. I don't want to say anything too much because I don't want to, like, possibly spoil anything, but you should. It's something that you should need to experience it by yourself. It's very well written. Also, like, another anime and manga called One Piece. I don't know if you know it. Like, it's not.
I know the name, but I don't know.
Yeah, the character writing is not as deep as Berserk, of course, but it's still it's a reason it's one of the most highest grossing selling mangas in history. Like, it's actually chapter 1050 got released a couple of days ago, and it's been all the news. Wow. And that,
oh my god,
it's even half of the story hasn't been covered yet. It's been going on for 20 years. Yeah. And here's the thing, you might be wondering, who has, like, that much patience to watch that? The story is captivating. Like, I personally started watching it and I reached episode 690, and because of the subtitles was hard sub with Spanish, I dropped it and I just started watching YouTube videos where people explain the story at that point. But that's another example. All right, this has been, like, the Japanese side of things, but let me go to the Western side of things. A very underrated series that I really enjoy and like in terms of writing for characters is Firefly, I think. Yeah, the series, because they made a sequel movie for it. Have you watched it? It's from 2001 or 2000.
I have not watched it. I know there was a movie based on that too, right?
Yeah, Serenity with Summer Glau and Nathan Fillion, I think. Yeah. Especially the character of Nathan Fillion, the writing was really good, I think, personally. Like, because here's the thing, I remember another thing. When a character writing is good, for example, when sometimes you're watching the movie or series or reading the book, you're deep into it. You're like, if I was in the shoes of that person, I would do this. Then, bam! The character does the exact same thing you were thinking, And that's another sign of good writing, in my opinion. And
that's a great answer, yeah.
And actually, I highly suggest anyone to watch it. To watch the Firefly series. It's just one season, by the way. It's not like One Piece that you need to watch like 1,000 episodes just to catch up. It's just one season, and there's also a movie sequel for it. And I think it got continued, but with comics, but they most times never. And I don't know if not just me. I think most people don't follow franchises when they just branch out into, like, comics and stuff like that, because. I like it when it's like everything is just ready in front of me. I know I'm a bit lazy, and there's that. But honestly, like, Firefly is really good. And and this was in the terms of movie. There's a genre that is super underappreciated, which is a Western, like, a space cowboy, Western cowboy, something like that. No. A space sci-fi, Western sci-fi. Yeah, Western sci-fi. I think that's the name. I love that genre. I love Cowboy Bebop. I like Serenity. Like, they're in the same genre.
Serenity is a big part. Yeah. It's a big example of that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I first that genre and the solar punk art scene. I know they're kind of like not really related, but these are my just bread and butter. I love this. And when it comes to video games, well-written video game characters. It's a really tough thing. Because, by the way, I need to admit, I don't, as much as I played a lot of video games, I've been into video games since I was 4. I personally don't claim myself to be as someone who has a wide knowledge of, like, different variety of video game, like, taste, and I haven't tasted enough things. There's a huge load of franchises I need to test, but it's been on my list for 7, 8 years now, but the list just gets longer, and I'm just don't get to it. Like I haven't, like my friend keeps for 6 years been telling me, you need to try Final Fantasy, you need to get into it, it's really good. And I'm like, no, like I will, but you need to download emulators for PC, then that, and then I'm like, all right, I'll probably watch the lore video on YouTube someday. And because that's mostly how I've been consuming media this past couple of years. I just watch recaps on YouTube, and it's actually super quite convenient. But
Yeah, you don't have to spend the 40 or so hours to
yeah,
play the game when you do that. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And that's kind of in a nutshell, that's basically my answer. I hope that was a good answer. And do you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
any other thing to add to that?
Yeah, just really quickly there, like you've mentioned Final Fantasy, okay? Like first of all, I Final Fantasy 14, I haven't I've played it many years ago. I haven't played the expansion. People keep saying that the expansions are the best thing since sliced bread in terms of character development there. So it seems that game has some of the most best fleshed out characters out there. But just to mention a very obscure one that probably not a lot of people know, because a lot of people haven't played Final Fantasy 12 2. Sorry, not 12 2, 13 2. A lot of people haven't played that, but like I've unfortunately have played all the Final Fantasy games. I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan. Final Fantasy 13 2, the villain of that, his name is Caius Ballad. His is for me one, if not the best fleshed out villain of a Final Fantasy game ever. And it's a shame that not more people have played that game, because it's named 13-2 as opposed to, let's say, what should have been 14 when it got released there, I believe. But like as the next entry within the series there, because that game is way better than 13, as in the first one that got released, and the writing, especially the writing of the villain, is incredible. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there, but not a lot of people will probably know about that.
All right, awesome. I'll check that as well. And there's just one last thing I just remembered. I'm so stupid. I can't believe I didn't mention this. The writing in Fallout New Vegas. Have you played that?
I have not.
I think a lot of people know it's my favorite game of all time. I played it when I was 12, and I was hooked ever since. But honestly, the writing, it's incredible for a video game. For a video game that that was developed on crunch time. It was outsourced from Bethesda to Obsidian, if I'm not mistaken, and they only had 1 year and 6 months or something to develop and just release it out. And for a game in that state, it's a masterpiece in terms of writing. Honestly, it might sound pretentious or obnoxious of me to say it, but if you go actually play some of the main characters in there, like for example, the Joshua Graham, I don't want to go into too much lore and just. I'm sure a lot of people who are watching the podcast are here for 3D art and stuff, and not this. But I'm not going to go into it too much. But I'm just going to say this: the characters are so well fleshed out. Like you actually get into the world. I know the graphics are from a 2010 game. I know it's not that immersive as the graphics now, but the characters are so well written. The whole story is so well written. Even the expansions and just everything, the whole big picture just looks amazing in terms of writing. And if it's the best way I could describe it is like, when you're reading a good fictional book, that you're into it. You're just in the zone and just imagining everything as you go by, and you don't care if it's been 8 hours, all right? It's like reading a good book. That's the best way I could describe it. But you're actually playing it. That's a bonus. That's better,
Yeah,
Like
that
that's what a
really
good game
cool.
should be. Yeah.
Yeah.
And all right. And the next question, which is kind of a bit of a tricky one for most people, artists, which is, who are some of your favorite artists and designers that have inspired you the most? I know there might be a lot. I know that artists are not good with names, they're good with images. But who are some of your favorite artists and designers?
Definitely Nivan Shantara that I've mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of my favorite concept artists. Unfortunately, I've tried a few times to kind of make a 3D version of his 2D characters, and his concepts are so creative that it actually makes it hard to do that from time to time. So I've unfortunately kind of failed that. I don't want to show that work that I've tried to do there, but his designs are extremely creative, extremely interesting. He really has a way with shapes and proportions and just details, you know. Um, so I love his work. Go and check his work out. Um, in terms of concept art, like this is gonna sound weird, but a lot of people who have inspired me are the people I have worked directly with because I had that kind of human contact, you know. So the whole team back at IDAS Montreal when we were working on the Deus Ex were a huge inspiration. There is the and center to that team was the art director. His name is Jonathan Jacques Beltête. We don't often think of like art directors when we think of people who either influence us or that we like or that has inspired us. But he is an art director that has inspired me tremendously, has helped me to grow tremendously. You know, like I mentioned at the beginning that when I started in the games industry, I was kind of like, okay, give me a concept and I'll draw it or I'll model it. And then that's my job, you know? And he really taught me to be an artist, you know? Like before meeting him and working on Deus Ex, I was a character modeler. When I finished Deus Ex, I was a character artist, or at least I was more of a character artist, if I can call myself that. And a lot of that was because of him, because he appreciates art, he appreciates good art, he appreciates creativity. I think it shows through the Deus Ex games. Like they are very visually creative. A lot of that, has to do, of course, with everyone who were doing concepts on the team, of course. But center to that was a contribution of Jonathan Jacques Beltête, who was a art director. He since has left IDOS. He now, I don't know the name of the studio where he works now, but he is working on a game, new IP, I believe, for that studio. And they have released a trailer for their game a few weeks ago. And you can see that he's just he's kind of back on track at creating very creative stuff. I'll think of the name of the studio where he works in the game that he is working on. It's like a small indie game, but you can see that it's very, again, highly visually creative. It's very, very interesting, you know? So I really, really appreciated to work with him, and he really has helped me to just really take seriously the idea that we are creating art as opposed to just modeling out characters like a bunch of robots. But, you know, when I was working on Deus Ex, the whole team there, like the concept art team was stacked, okay? Like those were all great people back then. Like we were working for a lot of people who were working for their own small indie studio on the side, which was called Steambot, which does not exist since then. But the people who were working on that are concept artists, which are still amazing, still on the top of their game. And I'm thinking here of people like Joel dos Res Viejas. I'm probably not pronouncing that properly. I apologize. I can give you the link to his our station page afterward as well. Thinking of people like Sébastien Laroudé, which was also really, really, really cool. We had Thierry Doison, which I don't believe still does concepts, but back then those people were doing art you wouldn't see elsewhere.
Thierry Doison, you said? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He was on the podcast, like, I think episode 40 or something. Yeah, I talked with him. He worked on the Prince of Persia IP, which was one of my favorite franchises when I was a kid. Sorry, I cut you off. I just heard a familiar name.
That's cool. Yeah. No, that guy was a legend back then. I don't know what became of him, though. I don't know that he still does concept art. Like, maybe you know better than
he's in France right now, and he has a kid now. He has obligations. Now they moved back to France. He's working as a concept artist at the company, I think. But yeah, I mean, I really love his art myself as well. And he worked on one of my favorite franchises when I was a kid, Prince of Persia. I just love that franchise. Especially, I used to, like, when our internet was dial-up in Iran, you know, and it wasn't very good. I used to like load up a poster of a concept art, and it would take like 7 minutes to load half of it. I remember I used to sit and just look at the concept art of the game, and I can't believe I talked to someone who was behind some of those concepts. And it was kind of crazy for me at the time. I was kind of fanboying all over the place.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah. So that guy was great. Who else? So I mean, I think specifically on Deus Ex Mankind Divided, I had worked with Frédéric Bennett, who is also art director now, but he was a concept artist back then. He was the one who had created the concept for Jensen for Mankind Divided. Also, extremely cool guy, very fun to work with, and also creates very, very, very cool concepts to work from. Um, also, I think this is another one of those who has kind of fallen off the radar. But the guy who created the initial concept for Jensen, his name was Jim Murray, and he is one of the most crazy painters, traditional painters with acrylic that I know of. Um, if you Google his name, you'll find some of the older things that he has done because he used to work on comic books as well. He was very highly influential. He's yet another one of those who kind of feel as if they've kind of fallen off the map, or at least he's very private, so he doesn't really share much. But um, any Jim Murray art you can find is guaranteed to blow your socks off. His character designs are just so crazy, so like so expressive, so good. Um, yeah, so through time, I think those are the people that kind of have stuck with me as people who create and have kind of influenced me in terms of character art. Um, but I want to say again, like how important Jonathan Jacques Beltête was. You know, like working with a really high quality, with an art director that really appreciates good art is one of the best things that you can do. You know, like is one of the best gifts that you can give to yourself as you start a journey within the games industry or VFX or like something. He taught me so much about art, and I actually find that a lot of the things that I appreciate now, I appreciate them because he has taught me how much he appreciated them and how great they were. You know, like at the beginning of the podcast, I was talking about fashion and fashion designers and stuff like that. Um, it's not a secret. Like I really appreciate these things now. I appreciate good fashion design because of Jonathan Jacques Beltête and how he really loved those things. And he really taught me how, and he showed me how creative some of these fashion designers are. You know, like I think of fashion designers like Iris Van Herpen. You know, if you check what she does, I like it
Oh
doesn't
yeah,
look like fashion like your traditional Gucci stuff. And
yeah.
although even then Gucci can be pretty interesting, but like she creates these crazy things. She often gets people to create new materials for her. Like she envisions like a dress or like a piece of
Even
fabric of some kind.
contraptions.
Contraptions, he said.
Yes, even contraptions. Like mechanical stuff or modules for hairdressers and designs.
Yeah. Like the work that she does is so crazy, right? And so she's highly creative. So like you can't look at that and just not be inspired by it. Like, and she was a huge influence for Deus Ex. Um, and I got to know her through Jonathan Jacques Beltête. So Iris Van Herpen, Gareth Pug or Puge. I never know how to pronounce his name, but its family name is Puge, Pugh. Gareth Pug or Puge, whatever. That's French, but still. Um, Also highly influential, great designs that he creates. His work is very, very, very inspiring.
All right. And by the way, you said others. Idris Van Hepburn was her name. Is it it?
Iris Van Herpen.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I messed it up. Actually, believe it or not, just a fun fact: the
I believe.
first ever video episode I recorded on the podcast was with someone who directly worked with her and designed
Oh, that's
Casey
insane.
Curran. Yeah, Casey Curran. He's a Seattle-based sculptor artist, and also he makes these beautiful mechanical contraptions that sometimes flies, like just installments. And he did a lot of work for it as well. And yeah, if you're really interested into that stuff, because he's been big into fashion as well. When it comes to those stuff, you definitely should check him out. Casey Curran, that's his name. If you want, I can later send.
Casey Curran.
Yeah, Casey Curran.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Please do.
And the next thing is, what are you working right now that you can tell us about? I mean, of course, there will be NDA involved, but just a little brief. Just what type of project is it? What are you working on? Just in general.
Well, I'm an open book, really. So, I mean, I do work with studios to help them train their staff. Obviously, I can't really talk about what the work that they're doing there, or even which studios are sort of involved there. But like my day to day is filled with helping people out, mentoring people, doing some 3D here and there. Not as much as I would like to these days. I don't work on secret projects because I don't work for a studio now, since I essentially mostly help people become better at their craft through recording classes, YouTube videos, mentoring, what have you, these sorts of things. So there isn't really anything that I'm working on that I can't really kind of quote unquote talk about. Um, or that could be interesting. I mean, I'm one of those. I hate to say it. I hate to admit it, but I'm one of those who will kind of keep a little personal project on the leash for years, and I can't really let go of it. Um, and I know someone who's worked on a. I'm not going to say whom, but if he listens to this podcast, I'm sure he's going to recognize himself. I know someone who's created a personal project, and it took him 5 years to do it. Um, And I just thought it's like crazy. Like, aren't you going to give up at some point? And I thought like at some point you're just never going to finish this if you've been working on this for like 5 years. 5 years. That was when I uh, I knew him. So actually at this point, and by the time he had released his character, because he did finish it eventually, I think it had been 7 years. Um, and so I'm kind of although I thought it was kind of ridiculous to work on a character for 7 years, I actually find that I'm kind of slowly going in that direction, because I'm still kind of a little bit like, sometimes when I want to work on a personal project, I do sketches here and there. I do like other little projects here and there that I kind of work on for a few days, and then I sort of put on the side there. But I keep coming back on my fan art of Balthier from Final Fantasy 12, because I just love the character so much. So that's always on the back of my mind there. I'm like, oh, okay, like there's work in progress shots of him on my portfolio. Everything is still very sketchy, and I kind of part of why I started that character a few years ago. Part of why I'm still working on it and I can't really let go of it is because, first, there's a sunk cost fallacy about the amount of time that I've put in there, and I can't actually bring myself to just say like, oh, I'll just let it go. But also, I think it also speaks to the power of like working on things that truly inspires you. Like, I just love this character because I don't know, I just love the character itself. So I just can't really let go of working on that personal project. And like, once every few months, I'm gonna open my Mars Designer files or my 3D files. I'm gonna work on it a little bit, then I'm gonna revisit it a few months later. I'm gonna keep working on it. So that project is always kind of on the back of my mind, and I still hope that one day I'm gonna be able to finish it. And although I thought it was ridiculous to work on a character for 7 years, I kind of realized that I'm kind of going in that direction. So it's actually, it's almost a challenge for me. It's like, no, I have to finish this character within 70 years so that I can actually beat that track record there. But yeah, that's it's one of the personal projects that I keep kind of coming back every few months and working on it a little bit and then coming back on it later. I don't know how healthy that is, to be honest, but it's a personal project, so we're supposed to do these things for fun, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what? All right. Here's the thing. It's kind of like we're taking a break right now from all these technical questions and all that. It's gonna be a little bit of like talk about other aspects, like what area beside the area, of course, you're working on right now, which is of course art and 3D modeling and character and mentoring and all of that. Just remove yourself from that word for a second. And aside that, what other hobbies or interests do you have or you want to get into more later?
Oh, that's a great question. It's important to have hobbies on the side, of course. If you don't have hobbies on the side, then your life becomes your work, and then that leads to burnouts. It's important to have hobbies on the side. Like I had a burnout in 2019. It's something that I'm quite happy to talk about, and I have in the past in some of my YouTube videos. And part of that burnout was the fact that 3D work, like I'm quite straight with the fact that I had a burnout leaving Guerrilla Games, but I don't consider the culture there to be the result of that. Okay, like the blame, I don't consider that the blame is on the studio. The blame is really on me, really, because I was the same when I was at IDAS Montreal. Before then, I was just always completely working all the time. I didn't really have hobbies on the side. I would do 3D and then I would think of 3D. That was like my work was my hobby, and that was a problem. So that kind of led to a pretty big burnout, and part of why I left the studio. So yeah, it's important to have hobbies. And since I have left there, I've kind of rediscovered the fact that I do love to do other things on the side, and that it is important to do that. And I've kind of changed my perspective of work, where now work is less my life, and now work is part of my life. It's an important part of my life, but it's not my life. You know, like I don't define my life by my work anymore. Um, and so I make sure to prioritize on a daily basis, doing things like physical exercise, doing things like cooking my own food so that I'm not always eating processed junk food. Um, I'm prioritizing getting good sleep. I'm prioritizing all of these things, and I'm trying to find a balance in there. And what I've realized is that, you know, like I am aging, of course, we all are. Um, I feel my body is getting a bit older too. Like a few years ago, I had like back pains, like from like time to time. Would sit on a chair, like oh, like my and I would see that my sort of energy level would slowly be going down. You know, because I wasn't working out, I wasn't really eating well. These sorts of things. You know, like I could feel my body progressively becoming older, and I decided I need to take this seriously because obviously, you know, my body's not going to suddenly get better. Like if I feel like shit now, sorry if I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word on your
Yeah, you can
podcast,
say
but
shit. No worries. No, I'm not sponsored
okay,
by anyone. Go.
cool. Like if I feel like shit now, I'm just going to feel worse as time goes on, right? So the only way I can do that is by taking this really, really seriously. So uh, my own health has, in a way, become my hobby. In a way, like finding ways to take care of myself, taking seriously the idea of doing exercise. At the beginning, not on a daily basis, but now I do it on a daily basis. I do exercise every day. I do different types of exercises that I appreciate, that you know I find joy in actually doing, which is running, is doing bouldering, is doing badminton, and I also go to the gym a few times a week. I don't do all these things in a given week, but I usually find something to do every day of these things that I kind of like to do. So those are pretty big hobbies. I find that they're very interesting. I find that bouldering uh, is something that I do for myself, you know, which is just climbing walls, of course, that are 5 meters high, and there are difficulties in there. And I find that it's very rewarding to always try to push myself to try to solve a new challenge, you know, like to try and progress. I find the progression in there to be very rewarding. To go to a bouldering session, not quite be able to climb a wall, even though I find that I'm kind of close to being able to climb it, but I'm not quite able to. And then that kind of stays in the back of my mind. And then a few days later, I go back and I can, you know, sometimes climb the wall that I had difficulty climbing before. So that progress feels very real, and it's very rewarding to find that my physical abilities is steadily increasing like that. Um, so I find a lot of pleasure in there, in doing that. And I have to say that throughout all these things that I have been doing, all those back pains I have mentioned before, I don't have those now. Like my body, like it feels like my body has become younger by probably at least like 10 years. I'm not actually joking. I feel 10 years younger now than I felt even like about a year ago, um, just by really kind of doing all of these things. And so, you know, feeling the progress makes me want to do it more. And therefore, that is kind of in a way that's a hobby, or that's a series of hobbies that kind of feed itself. Um, and yeah, so those are some of the things that I do on the side. Um, Other than that, well, I also make YouTube stuff. So
Awesome.
and I spend too much time doing personal YouTube videos that have no use, but that I still kind of like to do because they're also very creative.
I mean, if it helps with that self internal feeling of fulfillment, then it has use. It's not no use, you know. And I think it's also important to just not, do things for the sake of like, progressing in the industry or your work, but to do things that actually, makes you feel fulfilled, even if it means a little bit, you know. And about like the some of the things you said, like honestly, there some of the things you said are super underrated, and everyone knows it, but they're still underrated. Like running, getting good sleep, like honestly, like there's three things that I recommend everyone, regardless of like what basically a sport they're kind of pursuing, but these are like super important, like good sleep, running especially, and yoga. And I'm gonna admit I've been
Oh,
kind of
that's a
lazy
nice
with
one.
yoga for months. Like I haven't properly done anything. Oh, another thing, calisthenics.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Like I've built
Resistance training. Yeah.
I've built up this habit. Like of course I'm not as active as I was like years before. And it's kind of funny because before I tried to become an artist, like I always loved art. By the way, that's another story. But basically, before I started getting serious about art, I was serious about becoming a submission grappler and MMA fighter. I was on a whole another world.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah,
That's cool. Yeah.
and I trained that for years, but one thing led to another, and I decided, all right, I should actually be here. And I just don't want to go into the story, but honestly, yoga, flexibility, and especially yoga, running, it's so simple. It doesn't need any equipment. You just need a shoe that doesn't let rock hit the sole of your feet, and that's it. You're good to go. And I'm just gonna leave one tip that encompasses everything when it comes to improving in the physical basically areas and disciplines. The thing that matters the most is time under tension, in my opinion. Like for example, yeah, I mean, if you go run every day for 3 months with the same pace and you don't challenge yourself, I mean, it's better than nothing, but you're not improving. And if you don't see
You are
improvement,
absolutely right.
there
Yeah.
won't be any boost of motivation, and eventually
Mm.
it's gonna feel bland and flavorless.
Mhm.
It's like if you just cook rice if you just boil rice without adding anything, it's just like that. Yeah, it's food, but really. And yeah, that's about that. And well, we've reached the final section and question of the podcast. And I can't believe it's been 2 hours and 20 minutes. It didn't feel like that. It felt like 50 minutes, honestly. And it was a great way to get back into podcasting
Yeah,
after a
it's been a
month.
while. Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, thank you so much for coming by. And all right, this is actually an interesting question. And I really enjoy the answers, which is, I know it's a bit dramatic. Final words. Wow, like what's gonna be? But imagine this scenario. Imagine that you only had a limited amount of time, maybe a couple of minutes, all right? And in that limited amount of times, you could say anything, um, like basically your last final messages to anyone who might see it or read it or basically receive it, from Lord Gallagher to anyone else. What would that be? About anything.
If you have, if you have only, sorry, could you ask that again? So if you have a few minutes,
Yeah, maybe minutes, couple of minutes, doesn't matter, the 10 minutes, but a limited short amount of time.
the question being, if I have only a few minutes to say something important, what is that thing? Is that what you're
Yeah.
asking me right now?
Yes. Or wait,
About
just
anything,
anything.
or some?
All right, let me
Well,
rephrase it this way. This is actually more fun. Imagine we're in like a space shuttle and you're trapped in a pod and you're going to be sent off into the deep out abyss of space and you will never be seen again. And
Sure.
you're realize, all right, this is the last things I can say. What should I say?
Bring a second pair of pants.
Yeah, your last expressions.
Yeah.
What? Bring a second pair of pants. Was
Bring a
that the
second pair
answer?
of pants.
All right, awesome.
Yeah. Bring underwear. Bring a few.
Logical.
Bring a few copies of that because I think you're going to need it if you're on a space shuttle. Yeah. Well, closing words. Like we've just touched on something that I think is a lot of people know about but don't take enough seriously, which is their own health. There's an epidemic of burnout right now. So many people talk about burnout left and right, whether people in the games industry, outside the games industry, it doesn't really matter. I don't even think it's something that's related to the games industry at all, although there is something about artistic fields, I think, that do lead people to burnout because artistic fields are not as clear cut when it comes to whether you have made good work or not. Therefore, we have a tendency to put in more work because we don't know when to stop. We don't know when good is good enough. So I do believe that creative fields are perhaps a little bit different than more objective fields, perhaps when it comes to burnout. But also, there is also simply the environment in which we live on nowadays, where we're always trying to maximize the usage of our time, always trying to maximize the value of everything that we do, leads people to simple burnouts. Just social media, like we're always bombarded left and right with things to look at. We never really get a proper break from that. That's kind of like our mind often races all day because of things we have to do, people we have to talk to, posts we want to look at, podcasts we want to listen to, which I'm partly responsible because I also produce content and I'm like, hey, listen to me. So you know, it's important to take time for ourselves. It's important to find a way to disconnect from either work or the internet or other people. That email that you got 5 minutes ago can wait later if you have something more important that is going on. Um, that message that someone has sent you, you don't have to answer it right now. You can answer it even tomorrow. Um, I actually find you know, finding time for yourself where you're completely disconnected from the work that you do, from social media, is hugely important to keeping your mind straight. And I think it's a huge component to try to avoid burnout. Um, like we've talked about, having hobbies on the side, also very important, so that your work doesn't become your life. Because the moment if that happens and something happens to your work, or you can't work anymore, or if there's a stress at work, and your work is your life, that stress will consume you, and it's going to destroy you if the stress gets too much. But if stress is, if work is, if you make it so that it is part of your life, then you have an outlet for that stress. When the going gets tough at work, you have other things you can fall back to have a bit of a break there. Um, so finding balance, finding time away from social media, finding time away from work, doing other things on the side, for me, like, it is perhaps the most important message that people, um, I'm going to say should hear, but everyone knows that. It's just, the question is, why do we still, people know that they work too much, but why do they still work too much? I think that there's a lot of that pressure comes from social media, and always like wanting to either post things, or always wanting to appear perfect, or like always wanting to create the next portfolio piece that's going to go in your portfolio because you haven't posted something in 3 months, and you feel bad, and you're like, oh my god, I need to do something, and then you start working even though you don't really have the time to work. You still take on that work. It's okay to say no to things. It's okay to say no to people. um, I find that I get contacted a lot by people who are either looking for, a piece of freelance work that they would like to have done, and are sort of interested by my skills, or even contact me like, "Hey, can you like teach us X, Y, or Z?" Like either at a studio or people. Um, and I become very unhappy if I say yes to every offer that comes my way. It's lucrative, but then I kind of start to hate my life because I become a little bit too consumed by everything left and right, all the work that I have to do, everyone I have to talk to. Um, and I find that I'm more happy when I say no to people on a regular basis. It's like, no, sorry, I can't, I'd love to help you, but I can't do that because I'm already busy enough with like other things. Now, obviously, I'm fortunate to be in that position where I can't say no. I know that not everyone has the financial situation figured out enough that they can afford to turn down contracts, but um, it's important. You can't be at 100%, 100% of the time. Sorry, you can't be at 110%, 100% of the time. You need, you can be at 110%, maybe, I don't know, 70% of the time, maybe, I don't know. But that other 30%, you have to be able to disconnect from work. Because if you don't, even though the things that are in front of you that may seem very pressing right now, when you think of the long term, those things may just be a drop in the bucket in terms of the things that you will do throughout your life. I would like to be around here for a long time. I would like to stick around for many decades. And the only way that's going to happen is if I take care of myself, right? Like, else, sure, I have health right now, but there's no guarantee I'm going to have health in the future. So, like, me doing, like, trying to find a balance in my life right now is a way to live a longer life. The time that I am, let's say, not working right now is time that I will gain to work in the future, but I will be doing it at a much more balanced pace in terms of my life. So Turning down a contract right now isn't like, if I think of the long term of my life, for the long term, turning down something right now isn't me saying I'm somehow lazy and I'm not going to, that sort of opportunity will present itself back in the future. But if I burn the candles on both ends right now, there won't be a future for me to sort of aspire to, right? And so, yeah, um, it's hard to not everyone is in a situation where they can hope to maybe slow down the amount of work that they do. I get that, and some of those situations are actually pretty tragic when you talk to people. And it's like, no, but the moment I slow down, I won't be able to pay my bills. Those are hard situations to solve. I get that, but there are a lot of people who are in a situation where, let's face it, they could actually slow down a little bit and get a better balance within their life, but they're not actually doing it because there's a combination of peer pressure, personal pressure they're putting on their own shoulders. There's a combination of factors that makes them go at 110%, 100% of the time. And that's just something that is just not sustainable and always leads to burnouts. And there's a really big epidemic of that right now. So I really wish that people would think seriously about the consequences of overworking on their own health and for the long term more
Yeah,
than they do. Like, I'm sound like I'm lecturing people. Like, I'm sorry for that. It's just that so many people they know that they need to work out, but they don't do it. And I find that tragic because I'm like, I want you around, in 20, 30 years. I want you to still be there and to still be creating great art, but that is, you won't be able to do that if you overwork, if you're overstressed, if you medicate through alcohol or weed all the time. Weed is definitely better than booze, of course, there. But you see my point, right? It's like I
yeah,
want people
definitely.
there for like a long time, and they will only be able to do that if they take care of themselves, of course.
Yeah, I got that. That's actually such a nice message. If you will leave at the situation, that's actually such a wholesome message you left. But um, I want to actually add some stuff to that as well because I think it's a super important subject. Which is wait, let me sit up. I didn't realize I was just slouching right there. Right. So first things first, about the thing, yeah, they said a lot of people might get behind if they don't overwork themselves. The financial would be in trouble. Which the thing that I would conclude from that and try to summarize from that is that people usually start to think about this stuff when they reach a certain level of financial stability. All right, your financial set. What other areas are unstable? They will show it. Those other areas will eventually show themselves in their lives. Because when you're financially unstable, you don't give a fuck about anything else. You just want to see if your bills are paid and your rent is paid on time. That's it. And regardless of like any situation, I think people should realize that taking you can, but I mean, it comes with a certain level of knowledge and also hope for the future as well. And all right, I don't want to get too deep about like the philosophy of life or stuff like that, but it's actually kind of funny because a couple months ago I just fell into a deep existential depression. Like I did just existential crisis and stuff like that. And I actually, funnily enough, like it's kind of sound cocky for me to say, but I think I actually found the reason for my own living in life, which is, do you know, it's like you come to conclusions over time subconsciously. You get like your mind takes pieces of puzzle, then you suddenly have a eureka moment. And I had that eureka moment during while I was playing Valheim with my friend on multiplayer. Do you know the game Valheim?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
Here's what happened. So we beat the game with the full 5 bosses, and I was like, now what's the point? We've reached that level. We've had the best gear, best loot, the best thing you could have in the game. And I was like, what's the point now? And we were bored. And I was like, all right, I don't want to like start building stuff. Like I'm too tired of making more resources and stuff like that. There's no point anymore. I've reached the top, but here's what happened. I had this crazy idea. in the game you can build 3 different boats. There's a raft, there's a car, like it's a small boat, and there's a long big ship, like a big Viking ship. And I was like, you see that big mountain? Let's build the boat there and just slide and ski on it. And it was so ridiculously fun. We did it for like 2 weeks straight, like different setups, different times. And I was like, that's it, just have fun. I know it sounds crazy, like it sounds kind of, but trust me, I've been into this existential depression so much, and I was trying to make sense of it. I studied Bhagavad Gita, I've studied like different textbooks, religious textbooks, and tried to realize what people all around the world has concluded from, like the reason of living and stuff like that. And I guess is to just try to feel good and have fun. And I'm not saying this in the hedonistic term, in the hedonistic sense, but just in general, what makes your soul feel excited? I'm not talking about that physical rush. I'm that just both mental and spiritual rush. For me, it's just doing wild shit, and doing what I love, expressing myself the way I like. I mean, that's essentially why I chose art. The reason I got out of the martial art world is because first, I knew relatively compared to my competition, I started way late. So there was no prospect of me becoming a world champion or something. Like I was kind of like, I didn't even want to be a coach. I was like, I'm either all in or not in. And there was a risk of concussion and CTE and stuff like that. And there you come up with a lot of like egotistical assholes in the gyms all the time. They try to hurt you, but they pretend, oh, I didn't do that on purpose. It's a common thing all around the world, by the way. And I was like, what am I doing? I love art. And my reasoning was I went into sports first. I was like, I can't get my youth. I only have my youth once, And I started when I was 19, and 19 is, believe it or not, relatively late for like professional martial arts and stuff like that. There are like kids in Thailand that 10-year-olds that can kick my ass 6 times over and over. Like I'm honestly,
right.
Like you have to see the footage. Like the kids in Thailand, they train when they are 4 or 6. Like I'm not kidding.
Wow.
Like my coach, Krudon, he's I think 56 now. He was actually the coach of Buakau, one of the world champions in Muay Thai, and he showed us his pictures when he was a kid. He was like a smiling kid with a Muay Thai short, and it was like 4. And was fighting.
That's insane.
It's a common thing there.
Probably, yeah. They could probably still kick my ass even if they're 4 years old. I'm sure. No,
I'm 88 kilogram. They can kick at 40. Like no, at 30 kilogram Muay Thai kid can kick my ass. And I'm not exaggerating. Like actually, you don't see the conditioning they go through. All right, wait. See, I kind of have a mild ADHD as well from where I came here. But yeah, in conclusion, trying to find the things that make you happy and try to let that like driving factor in your life over everything be the feeling of love, not fear. Like, and I'm sounding a bit preachy. I'm sorry, but that's the gist of it. Honestly, the whole thing. Like you can read and study as much text as you want, but it all boils down to this. Yeah. And that's about it. We reached the end of the podcast, and thank you so much for coming by. This has actually been officially the longest episode I've ever recorded, episode 160. I genuinely enjoyed it. And where can people contact you if they had any questions?
People can contact me. I just want to say thanks, by the way. So thanks for the invite. It was quite fun for me as well. People can contact me by writing to me at info@outgang.studio.
Yeah, I'll put that in the caption as well, because you didn't have an Instagram, by the way. That's really nice. I wish I couldn't have an Instagram because I needed, because as you know, like most companies check your social medias, they do usually. And for me to increase my chances of getting out, I want to still post art on my Instagram as well. Yeah. That's literally the only reason.
I do have an Instagram, but it's so neglected that it's probably not even worth to mention it. So because I don't post there on a regular basis. Email is the best way to reach me. I mean, people can also send me friend requests on Facebook, but I think I'm up to like 5,000 friends there, so it's kind of getting a bit complicated. And like the best way really is like
email. I think.
Yeah, just emails is the best way really.
Sure.
To reach me.
Sure, I'll put the email in the captions as well. And that's about it. Thank you to anyone who tuned in and listened to this episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. And by the way, to anyone who listened till 2 hours and 30 minutes, let me tell you something. You will be rewarded. Just contact me. I will send you some cool PDFs. Honestly. But I can't say why, because I might be legally in trouble. But yeah, good stuff. Quality stuff. Yeah. Contact me. All right, that's about it. Take care, everyone. Till next episode. Bye.